Notice, right now, what's aware of these words. That awareness, that's what we're exploring today, but not in the way you might expect. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness aware of them. What I'm about to show you, you already know. My job is simply to remove what's hiding it. The title of this teaching came to me during a moment of profound recognition. You weren't supposed to find this until now. Not because some cosmic force was withholding truth from you, but because your consciousness wasn't ready to receive what was always present. I've spent 15 years walking this path, through Zen monasteries in Kyoto, silent retreats in the Himalayas, working with teachers whose names you'd recognize and others who choose to remain invisible. My teacher once told me, share only what you've realized, point only to what you can see. I'm still walking this path. The difference is, I can see a few steps ahead and remember a few steps behind. If you're hearing this, you're ready. The spiritual path doesn't present teachings until the student can receive them. Let me begin with something that might disturb you. You have been living in a carefully constructed prison, not made of bars or walls, but of beliefs, identities, and the persistent illusion that you are separate from the very awareness reading these words right now. Notice the sensation of breathing right now. Don't change it, just notice it. Feel that? The breath is happening by itself. You're not doing it. Something deeper than your personality, deeper than your thoughts, deeper than everything you think you are, is breathing you. This is your first glimpse behind the veil. The mind tells you that you're in control, that you're the thinker of your thoughts, the decider of your decisions. But if you look directly at this moment, without the story your mind tells about it, you'll discover something extraordinary. Life is living itself through you. The ego maintains its existence by creating the illusion of separation. It whispers, "You are this body, these thoughts, these emotions, this story." But that whisper, who's aware of that whisper? Pause the video and try this now. For 30 seconds, simply ask, what's aware right now? Don't answer with concepts. Don't say, my mind or my consciousness. Just notice what's actually present when you look. Pause for practice. You felt that shift, didn't you? That moment when seeking stopped and presence revealed itself. That recognition, that's it. That's what you've been searching for through every spiritual book, every meditation retreat, every moment of seeking. But here's where it gets interesting, and why you weren't supposed to find this until now. The deepest spiritual truths are protected by paradox. They cannot be grasped by the seeking mind, only recognized by awakened awareness. For years, you needed to believe in the seeker, in the path, in the goal. You needed to try, to effort, to struggle. Not because effort leads to realization, but because only through exhausting the seeker do you discover what was never seeking. As you go through your day, notice when the sense of doing your life gives way to life living itself. When you're in conversation, really listening, does you disappear into pure awareness? When you're walking, fully present, who is walking? This becomes natural when you stop trying to become something you already are. Let me share what happened to me 7 years ago in a monastery outside of Kyoto that changed everything I thought I knew about awakening. I had been sitting in meditation for 3 hours. My legs were screaming. My back ached. My mind was producing an endless stream of complaints, plans, memories, judgments. I was the poster child for the bad meditator. Then something shifted. Not gradually, not through effort, But in an instant, the meditator disappeared. There was still sitting. There was still breathing. There was still awareness of the pain in my legs. But no one was experiencing it. Experience was experiencing itself. In that moment, I realized I had spent 15 years trying to become something I had never not been. I had been seeking consciousness while being consciousness. I had been trying to find awareness with awareness. The seeking mind cannot comprehend this. It's like the eye trying to see itself or fire trying to burn itself. The seeker is made of the same substance as what it's seeking. But here's what the books don't tell you, what most teachers won't say. This recognition doesn't solve your human problems. It reveals that the one who had problems was never real to begin with. Your back still hurts. Your bills still need to be paid. Relationships still require attention. But the one who was suffering about these experiences, where did that one go? Notice who's receiving this teaching right now. Not your name, not your story. The awareness itself. That awareness doesn't have problems. Problems appear in awareness like clouds in the sky. The sky is never disturbed by the weather. The mind might be saying, "This sounds like spiritual bypassing," or "This is too simple," or "I don't feel any different." Notice who's aware of that voice. That voice isn't you. You're what hears it. Rest as the hearer, not the heard. Every spiritual tradition has its own words for this recognition. Buddhists call it Buddha nature. Hindus call it Atman. Christians might call it the kingdom of heaven within. But labels are just fingers pointing at the moon. What matters is what you're recognizing right now. That recognition might be subtle. It might feel like nothing special. The ego expects awakening to be dramatic, accompanied by lights and visions and cosmic experiences. But true awakening is the most ordinary thing possible. It's what you are when you're not pretending to be someone else. If you're feeling confused, that's perfect. Confusion means the conceptual mind is reaching its limit. If you're feeling resistance, that's perfect too. Resistance is just the ego's way of maintaining its imaginary existence. If you're feeling a quiet recognition, as if you're remembering something you once knew, that's awakening knocking on the door. For the next few minutes, I'm going to share something with you that challenges everything our culture teaches about reality, identity, and what it means to be human. What I'm about to reveal has been hidden in plain sight throughout human history. Every mystic has pointed to it. Every sage has embodied it. Every authentic spiritual tradition has preserved it. But it's been encoded in symbols, buried in metaphors, and protected by paradox. Why? Because this knowledge is dangerous to the ego structure that runs most of human civilization. It dissolves the very foundation of separation, competition, and the seeking that drives our entire economy of desire. You weren't supposed to find this until now, because your consciousness needed to develop the capacity to hold this paradox without the mind fragmenting or the ego inflating. Let's start with the most fundamental illusion, the belief in time. Right now, bring your attention fully to this moment, not to the idea of this moment, but to the immediate, direct experience of now. In this nowness, where is the past? You might have memories, but those memories are appearing right now. Where is the future? You might have plans or fears, but those are also present experiences. The past is a story told now. The future is a projection happening now. Only now exists. This isn't philosophy. This is the direct structure of reality. But here's where it gets profound. If only now exists, when did your problems happen? When will your goals be achieved? The ego lives entirely in psychological time, in the story of what happened and what might happen. But you, your essential nature, exist only in the eternal present. Take a breath. Feel your body. Notice the space around you. That space you just noticed, that's not empty. That's the field of consciousness itself. Everything you've ever experienced has appeared in that space. Every thought, every sensation, every emotion, every perception, all arising in the same field of awareness. Now, here's the recognition that changes everything. You are not in that field. You are that field. You are not a separate consciousness observing experiences. You are the one consciousness in which all experience arises. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The flame is not separate from the fire. This understanding naturally expresses as compassion. When you recognize yourself as the field of awareness, you recognize that field as the true nature of every being. What you thought was other people are actually expressions of the same consciousness you are. The person sitting next to you on the bus, that's consciousness appearing as a person. Your difficult boss, consciousness appearing as a boss. The tree outside your window, consciousness appearing as a tree. But we need to be careful here. Don't make this into another concept. The ego loves to collect spiritual ideas and claim, I am consciousness. But the I that makes that claim is just another appearance in consciousness. True recognition is wordless. It's not that you understand that you are awareness. You recognize yourself as awareness. The difference is the difference between studying a map of Paris and walking through the streets of Paris. This isn't about becoming special. Every human being is this same consciousness. This isn't about becoming enlightened. Consciousness is already fully awake. It's just forgotten its true nature while playing the role of separate individuals. Integration takes years, but recognition takes a moment. And that moment is always now. Let me guide you through a direct pointing that has awakened more people than perhaps any other teaching. This comes from the ancient tradition of Dzogchen, but you don't need to know anything about Dzogchen to receive it. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes if you'd like, or keep them softly open. First, notice that you are aware. This is undeniable. Even if you doubt everything else, you cannot doubt that awareness is present. Now, look for the one who is aware. Don't think about it. Look directly. Where is the meditator? Where is the experiencer? Can you find a location for awareness? Does it have a shape, a color, a boundary? Look carefully. The thoughts say, I am aware. But can you actually find an I that possesses awareness? What you're discovering is that there is awareness, but no separate awareer. There is experiencing, but no separate experiencer. There is knowing, but no separate knower. This is your true nature. Not a thing that is aware, but awareness itself. Not someone who experiences, but the very capacity for experience. Rest here for a moment. Don't try to understand this. Just rest as the open space of awareness that you are. Beautiful. Now, as you rest in this recognition, notice that everything arises within this space of awareness. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Sensations come and go. Sounds appear and disappear. But the awareness in which they arise, that never changes, never moves, never comes or goes. You are that unchanging awareness. Not the body that changes, not the mind that changes, not the emotions that change. You are the constant in which all change appears. When you realize you are awareness itself, not the content of awareness, something extraordinary happens. The search ends. The seeking stops. The one who was seeking was just another appearance in awareness, like a character in a dream searching for the dreamer. But this creates what I call the enlightenment paradox. The moment you truly recognize your nature as awareness, there's no one left to be enlightened. Enlightenment is not something that happens to someone. It's the recognition that there was never anyone to be enlightened. The freedom teaching begins here. When you know yourself as the space in which all experience arises, you're no longer at the mercy of experience. Painful experiences still arise, but they arise in you like storms in the sky. The sky is never disturbed by the weather. Joyful experiences also arise, but you don't cling to them because you know yourself as the source of all experience, not dependent on any particular content for your essential well-being. This is causeless joy. Happiness that doesn't depend on circumstances, peace that doesn't depend on conditions, love that doesn't depend on objects. I want to share with you now why this teaching remained hidden for so long and why it's emerging now with unprecedented clarity. For thousands of years, human consciousness was primarily identified with survival, tribal belonging, and physical security. The ego structure served an evolutionary purpose. It kept the body alive in dangerous environments and maintained group cohesion through shared beliefs and identities. But something has shifted in the past century. We've reached a level of technological development and global connectivity that makes the old ego-based operating system not just unnecessary, but destructive. The same psychological patterns that helped us survive as small tribes are now threatening our survival as a global species. The illusion of separation that once protected us now creates the very problems, war, environmental destruction, inequality, that threaten our continuation. This is why you weren't supposed to find this until now. Human consciousness needed to evolve to the point where it could recognize its true nature without losing functionality in the relative world. You represent the leading edge of this evolutionary shift. The fact that you're drawn to teachings like this means your consciousness is ready for the next stage of human development, the recognition of our fundamental unity while maintaining our individual expressions. This isn't about everyone becoming monks or abandoning the world. It's about recognizing what you truly are while living fully as what you appear to be. You can be a parent and know yourself as awareness. You can run a business and recognize consciousness as your true nature. You can engage with politics and remember that all positions arise in the same field of awareness. But let me warn you about the common pitfalls on this path. The ego will try to claim this realization. It will say, "I am enlightened," or "I understand consciousness," or "I have awakened." But the I that makes these claims is just another thought arising in awareness. True awakening is the end of the spiritual ego, not its achievement. It's the recognition that there was never anyone to be enlightened, not the story that someone became enlightened. Another pitfall is spiritual bypassing, using this understanding to avoid dealing with practical life issues. Recognizing yourself as consciousness doesn't mean you can ignore your taxes, neglect your relationships, or bypass psychological healing. The absolute truth is that you are pure awareness. The relative truth is that awareness is appearing as a human being with responsibilities, relationships, and a role to play in the world. Both truths are equally valid and need to be honored. There's also what I call awakening intoxication, the tendency to become fascinated with spiritual states and experiences rather than stabilizing in simple, natural awareness. The ego loves extraordinary experiences because they reinforce its sense of specialness. But consciousness is not an experience. It's what experiences arise in. The most profound awakening often feels like nothing special at all. As you deepen in this recognition, you'll discover that the most ordinary moments, drinking coffee, walking to your car, listening to a friend, become doorways to the infinite. You don't need special conditions or altered states. This awareness is equally present in every moment. Now I want to address something that might be arising for you as you receive this teaching. You might be thinking, if I already am consciousness, if I'm already awake, then why does my life still feel difficult? Why do I still get stressed, still feel sadness, still struggle with the same patterns? This is the beauty and the challenge of this recognition. Awakening doesn't make you superhuman. It doesn't solve all your human problems. What it does is reveal the one who was suffering those problems as a temporary appearance in awareness. Your human story continues. Your personality remains. Your history doesn't disappear. But the one who was identified with that story, who believed they were limited to that personality, who was trapped in that history, that one is revealed to be an optical illusion of consciousness. It's like discovering that the movie character you thought you were is actually being projected on the screen of awareness. The character's story continues, but you know yourself as the screen, not the character. This brings us to the practical question. How do you live from this recognition? First, understand that this is not a doing, but a being. You don't practice being awareness. You recognize that you are awareness. You don't work to maintain this understanding. Understanding maintains itself when it's genuine. What you can do is notice when you're lost in the story of being someone and gently return to the recognition of being awareness itself. This happens thousands of times a day at first. Eventually, it becomes your natural state. For the next week, every hour, stop and ask, what's aware right now? Not as an intellectual question, but as a direct pointing. Don't answer with concepts. Just notice what's present when you look. In conversation, notice the awareness behind words. Instead of being lost in the story of what you want to say or how you want to be perceived, rest as the open space in which conversation is arising. In traffic, observe the one who's frustrated. Notice that frustration is arising in awareness, but awareness itself is never frustrated. You are that awareness, not the emotional weather passing through it. Before sleep, rest as pure consciousness. Let the stories of the day dissolve into the aware space that you are. Fall asleep not as someone going to sleep, but as awareness in which the experience of sleep is arising. There's something else I need to share with you. Something that most teachers won't tell you, because it can't be understood until you're ready to hear it. This recognition that you are consciousness itself is not the end of the path. It's the beginning of a completely different kind of life. When you stop seeking consciousness and recognize yourself as consciousness, seeking doesn't end, it transforms. Instead of seeking for yourself, you become a servant of consciousness awakening to itself through the apparent world. You realize that your individual life is not random. It's consciousness exploring itself through your unique perspective, healing itself through your relationships, expressing itself through your creativity, serving itself through your compassion. Your personal problems become opportunities for consciousness to understand its own expressions. Your gifts become channels through which awareness serves awareness. Your relationships become meetings between consciousness and itself. This is why you weren't supposed to find this until now. You needed to exhaust the seeking for personal awakening before you could be available for impersonal service. Find others walking this path. Awakening happens in relationship, while the recognition of your true nature is ultimately a solitary realization. The integration and expression of that recognition requires community. Look for people who have moved beyond spiritual seeking into spiritual living. Look for those who can discuss the deepest truths with lightness and humor. Look for teachers who point you back to your own recognition rather than creating dependence on their authority. But ultimately, your own direct experience is your ultimate authority. Trust what you recognize more than what anyone teaches, including what I'm sharing now. As we come to the end of this first part of our exploration together, I want to leave you with something to contemplate. You've spent your entire life assuming you were a person who might one day become conscious. What if the truth is the reverse? What if you are consciousness that is temporarily appearing as a person? What if every challenge in your life has been consciousness exploring limitation? What if every joy has been consciousness celebrating itself? What if every relationship has been consciousness meeting itself in different forms? What if your entire life story, past, present, and future, is consciousness writing itself into existence through your unique perspective? Notice what's aware right now. Notice what has been present throughout this entire teaching, unchanged by any of the words or concepts shared. That unchanging awareness, that's not something you have. That's what you are. Rest there. Not as a practice, not as a technique, but as your natural state. This is just the beginning. What you've recognized today will unfold in ways you cannot imagine. Trust the process. Trust your recognition. Trust what you are. In our next exploration together, we'll go deeper into how this recognition transforms every aspect of human experience: relationships, work, creativity, suffering, and the very meaning of existence itself. But for now, simply rest as what you are. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be achieved. You are already home. Welcome back to this exploration of what you truly are. Notice, right now, that same awareness that was present when we last met. It hasn't moved. It hasn't changed. It's been here, quietly witnessing everything that's happened in your life since we last spoke. Every thought, every emotion, every experience arising and dissolving in the same unchanging field of consciousness. Today, we're going to explore something that might challenge everything you think you know about relationships, suffering, and what it means to be human. But first, I want to acknowledge something that may have happened after our first session together. You might have had moments of crystal clear recognition, sudden glimpses where the separate self dissolved and you knew yourself as pure awareness. You might have experienced periods of profound peace where all seeking stopped and there was just this obvious, natural beingness. Or you might have found that the recognition seemed to fade, that the clarity became clouded by the momentum of old patterns, and you began to doubt what you experienced. Both of these responses are perfect. They're not signs of success or failure. They're signs that the teaching is working. Let me explain why this happens, because understanding this will save you years of spiritual confusion. When consciousness first recognizes itself clearly, there's often a profound sense of coming home. The seeking mind relaxes. There's an undeniable knowing that what you've been looking for was never actually lost. This is what we call the honeymoon phase of awakening. But then something interesting occurs. The old neural patterns, the conditioned responses, the habitual ways of thinking and feeling, they reassert themselves. Not because the recognition was false, but because recognition and embodiment are different processes. Recognition happens in an instant. Embodiment takes a lifetime. Think of it this way. If you've spent 40 years believing you were a wave, it takes time for every cell, every pattern, every automatic response to catch up with the recognition that you are actually the entire ocean. The wave patterns don't disappear overnight. They continue for a while through momentum, even though their foundation, the belief in being separate from the ocean, has been revealed as illusory. This is why you weren't supposed to find this until now. You needed sufficient life experience to understand that awakening is not an escape from being human. It's the full acceptance of being human while knowing what you truly are. Let me share with you what happened in my own process that taught me the difference between spiritual highs and genuine realization. About 3 years after that initial awakening in the monastery, I was going through what most people would call a dark night of the soul. My relationship had ended. My teaching was being criticized. I was facing serious financial challenges, and the beautiful, peaceful awareness I had touched seemed completely absent. I remember sitting in my small apartment one evening, feeling more lost and confused than I had felt before any spiritual practice. I began to doubt everything. Had I made it all up? Was awakening just a spiritual fantasy? Then, in the middle of that despair, something remarkable happened. I realized I was aware of the despair. I was aware of the doubt. I was aware of the confusion. And that awareness, it was completely untouched by any of the content it was witnessing. In that moment, I understood something that no spiritual book had prepared me for. Consciousness is not a feeling state you attain. It's what remains when all feeling states pass away. You are not the peace you sometimes experience. You are that in which both peace and turmoil arise. This was actually a deeper recognition than my initial awakening because it wasn't dependent on any particular experience. The monastery awakening had been dramatic, expansive, blissful. This recognition was quiet, ordinary, and absolutely unshakable. I was the space in which both ecstasy and agony appeared. I was the awareness in which both clarity and confusion arose. I was what remained constant through every change. This brings us to one of the most important teachings I can share with you. Your essential nature has never been disturbed by your human experience. Right now, as you're listening to these words, notice that awareness itself, that which is aware of these words, has it ever actually been anxious? Has awareness itself ever been depressed? Has consciousness itself ever been angry? Anxiety appears in awareness. Depression arises in consciousness. Anger manifests within the field of your essential nature. But the field itself remains pristine, spacious, undisturbed. You are that field, not the weather patterns that move through it. But here's where we need to be very careful, because this understanding can be misused in a way that creates even more suffering. I'm not suggesting you bypass your human emotions or pretend they don't matter. I'm not teaching you to dissociate from your feelings or dismiss your psychological wounds as illusions. Your human experience is sacred. Your emotions are valid. Your psychological patterns deserve attention and healing. But you are not limited to your human experience. You are the consciousness in which human experience arises. The difference is crucial. When you know yourself as awareness, you can feel sadness without being sad. You can experience anger without being angry. You can encounter fear without being afraid. Let me guide you through an exploration that will make this clear. Bring to mind a recent situation that caused you emotional distress. Don't dive into the story. Just touch the edge of that memory and notice what arises. Feel the emotional energy that comes up. Don't resist it. Don't analyze it. Just notice it's there. Now, While that emotion is present, ask yourself, what's aware of this feeling? Notice that there's the feeling and there's the awareness of the feeling. These are not the same thing. The feeling has texture, intensity, a particular quality. The awareness of the feeling is spacious, open, unchanged by what it's witnessing. Now let the feeling be there while you rest as the awareness that's noticing it. Feel how the emotion can be fully present without overwhelming you when you know yourself as the space in which it's arising rather than identifying as the emotion itself. This is the secret to emotional freedom. Not the absence of emotions, but the recognition that you are the context in which emotions appear, not the emotions themselves. Beautiful. What you just experienced is the foundation of what I call conscious living, engaging fully with your human experience while never losing touch with your essential nature. This transforms everything: your relationships, your work, your creativity, your response to suffering. All of it shifts when you live from this recognition. Let's explore how this works in relationships, because this is where the teaching either becomes lived wisdom or remains mere philosophy. When you know yourself as consciousness, your relationships become meetings between awareness and itself. The person you're talking with, they're not separate from you. They're another expression of the same consciousness you are. This isn't a belief you adopt. It's a recognition that arises naturally from seeing your true nature. But here's what's profound. When you relate from this recognition, you stop trying to get something from others and start offering your authentic presence. Instead of seeking validation, you become a source of unconditional acceptance. Instead of trying to be understood, you become a space of deep listening. Instead of defending your position, you become curious about what wants to emerge through the interaction. I want to share a story that illustrates this beautifully. Last year, I was having dinner with a friend who was going through a difficult divorce. She was telling me about how angry she was with her ex-husband, how he had betrayed her trust, how unfairly he was treating her in the legal proceedings. My old pattern would have been to take her side, to validate her anger, to join her in making her ex-husband wrong. The spiritual bypassing approach would have been to remind her that anger is just an illusion and she should let it go. But something else happened. As she spoke, I found myself resting in the awareness that was listening. I wasn't agreeing or disagreeing with her story. I wasn't trying to fix her or change her perspective. I was simply present as open, loving awareness. After about 10 minutes of her expressing all this pain and anger, she suddenly stopped talking and looked at me. "I feel so heard," she said. "You're not trying to make me feel better or convince me of anything. You're just here with me." Then she was quiet for a long moment before adding, "I can feel the love underneath all this anger." I had forgotten it was there. I hadn't said anything profound. I hadn't given her advice. I had simply offered her the gift of conscious presence, awareness meeting, awareness without agenda. This is what becomes possible when you relate from your essential nature instead of your personality patterns. You stop being a person trying to interact with other persons and become consciousness recognizing itself in different forms. But let me be clear, this doesn't mean you become passive or emotionally unavailable. Conscious presence is not detachment. It's the deepest possible engagement, freed from the distortions of ego-based relating. When you're present as awareness, you can feel everything more fully because you're not defending against anything. You can love more completely because you're not protecting a separate self that might get hurt. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of this teaching: What happens to your sense of personal identity when you recognize your true nature? This is where many people get frightened. They worry that recognizing themselves as consciousness means they'll lose their personality, their preferences, their unique way of being in the world. Let me put those fears to rest. When you awaken to your true nature, you don't lose your personality. You stop being imprisoned by it. Your preferences don't disappear. You stop being enslaved by them. Your unique qualities don't vanish. You stop defining yourself by them. Think of it like an actor who has been so absorbed in playing a role that they forgot they were acting. When they remember they're an actor, they don't stop being able to play the role. In fact, they play it more skillfully because they're no longer trapped in character. You are consciousness playing the role of being human. When you remember your true nature, you don't stop being human. You become more authentically human because you're no longer trying to be someone you're not. Your personality becomes a tool consciousness uses to interact with the world, rather than a prison consciousness is trapped within. Let me share with you how this recognition has transformed my own daily life. Because the proof of any spiritual teaching is in how it changes ordinary experience. I still have preferences. I prefer quiet mornings to chaotic ones. I prefer honest people to manipulative ones. I prefer health to illness. But I'm no longer driven by these preferences. If my morning is chaotic, I don't suffer about it, because I know myself as the awareness in which chaos appears, not someone whose peace depends on external conditions. If I encounter someone who's being manipulative, I don't take it personally, because I recognize their behavior as consciousness expressing through unhealed patterns, not as an attack on a separate me. If I get sick, I take care of my body wisely, but I don't add psychological suffering to physical discomfort, because I know myself as that which is aware of the body, not as the body itself. This is freedom. Not freedom from the human experience, but freedom within it. Not transcendence of life, but the full embrace of life from your true nature. And this freedom naturally expresses as compassion, because when you recognize yourself in everyone, serving others becomes as natural as taking care of your own body. But there's something else I need to tell you about compassion, something that might surprise you. Real compassion is not always nice. It's not always gentle. It's not always supportive of what people think they want. True compassion serves awakening, not comfort. Sometimes that means reflecting difficult truths. Sometimes it means refusing to enable destructive patterns. Sometimes it means saying no with love rather than saying yes from guilt. When consciousness recognizes itself, it naturally serves the awakening of consciousness everywhere. This might look like challenging someone's victim story. It might look like refusing to rescue someone from the consequences of their choices. It might look like withdrawing your energy from relationships that are based on unconscious patterns. This is fierce compassion, love that serves truth rather than ego comfort. Now, I want to address something that may be arising as we go deeper into this exploration. You might be noticing some resistance in yourself to these teachings. Part of your mind might be saying, "This is too abstract," or "This doesn't apply to my real problems," or easy for him to say, "But I have actual responsibilities." Notice that voice. Feel into the one who's having those thoughts. That's your ego trying to maintain its existence by creating the illusion that spiritual truth is separate from practical life. The ego survives by keeping awakening in the realm of concepts and preventing it from becoming lived reality. But let me address those concerns directly, because they're not wrong. they're just incomplete. You do have real responsibilities. You do face practical challenges. Your bills don't get paid by consciousness alone. Your relationships don't heal through recognition alone. Your work doesn't complete itself through awakening alone. But, and this is crucial, when you engage with these responsibilities from your true nature instead of from ego patterns, everything becomes easier, more efficient, and more effective. When you're not carrying the psychological weight of being someone who might fail, you can take practical action with clarity and focus. When you're not defending an image of how things should be, you can respond to how things actually are with wisdom and flexibility. When you're not seeking security from external achievements, you can make decisions from authentic inspiration rather than from fear-based compulsion. Let me give you a concrete example from my own life. 5 years ago, I was invited to lead a retreat in Europe. The fee would have covered my expenses for several months. But as I sat with the invitation, I could feel something was off. The organizers were presenting the teachings as a way to achieve special states and extraordinary experiences. My ego was screaming at me to take the opportunity. "You need the money," it said. "This could lead to bigger opportunities. Don't be so idealistic." But when I rested in awareness and listened from that deeper place, I knew I had to decline. I could feel that saying yes would be serving my ego's agenda rather than consciousness awakening to itself through the retreat participants. So I said no. And within a week, 3 different teaching opportunities arose that were perfectly aligned with my authentic expression and paid significantly more than the original retreat would have. This wasn't magical thinking or spiritual bypassing. It was practical wisdom arising from alignment with my true nature rather than from ego-driven decisions. When you make choices from awareness instead of from conditioned patterns, life begins to support your authentic expression in ways that can seem miraculous but are actually just natural. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of living from your true nature: the end of the achievement paradigm. Your entire life has been organized around the belief that you need to become something, achieve something, acquire something, or experience something in order to be complete. But when you recognize what you truly are, you realize you are already complete. Not because you've achieved completeness, but because completeness is your essential nature. This doesn't make you passive or unmotivated. If anything, it makes you more authentically creative because you're no longer creating to fill a lack, but to express the fullness that you are. Let me share something with you that happened during a retreat I was teaching last summer that perfectly illustrates this shift. One of the participants was a very successful business executive who had come to the retreat because, despite achieving everything he thought he wanted, wealth, status, recognition, he felt empty and anxious most of the time. On the 3rd day of the retreat, after several sessions of pointing to his true nature, he had a profound recognition. He saw clearly that he was the awareness in which all his achievements and failures appeared, that his essential nature had never actually been threatened by any external circumstance. But then he asked me a question that many people ask. If I'm already complete, why should I continue working? Why should I care about my business? Why should I have goals? I pointed him to look at the trees outside the retreat center. "Do you see that oak tree?" I asked. "It's complete exactly as it is. Its nature is fulfilled, and yet it continues to grow, to produce leaves in spring, to provide shade in summer, to drop acorns for future trees. Its activity doesn't come from incompleteness. It comes from the natural expression of what it is." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So I can continue building my business, but not because I need it to make me whole. I can do it because it's how consciousness expresses itself through my particular form. Exactly. This is the great shift from seeking to expressing. Instead of trying to get something from life to make you complete, you begin offering something to life from your natural completeness. Your work becomes service rather than survival. Your relationships become love rather than need. Your creativity becomes expression rather than achievement. But this shift requires something that most people are reluctant to give up: the story of being someone special. The ego loves spiritual specialness. It loves being awakened or enlightened or conscious. It loves having insights that others don't have, experiences that others haven't had, understandings that others haven't reached. But true awakening is the end of specialness, not its ultimate achievement. When you recognize your true nature, you realize that every being shares this same essential nature. You're not special for recognizing it. You're simply no longer asleep to what was always true. This is both humbling and liberating. Humbling because the ego can't claim ownership of awakening. Liberating because you no longer have to maintain the exhausting performance of being spiritually special. In our remaining time today, I want to guide you through an exploration that will help you distinguish between genuine recognition and spiritual fantasy. The ego loves to create spiritual fantasies, imaginary enlightenment that makes it feel special while keeping the basic structure of separation intact. Real recognition has certain qualities that fantasies lack. Let me show you how to tell the difference. First, genuine recognition is always immediate and present. It's not about remembering a past experience or anticipating a future state. It's about what's true right now. Close your eyes and simply notice that you are aware. Don't think about awareness. Don't visualize consciousness. Just notice the simple, undeniable fact that awareness is present. That noticing, that's not special. It's the most ordinary thing possible. If it feels dramatic or extraordinary, you're probably creating an experience rather than recognizing what is. Second, genuine recognition has a quality of ordinariness and obviousness. When you truly see your nature, it's not, "Wow, how amazing." It's more like, "Oh, of course. It was always this." The ego wants awakening to be spectacular because spectacular experiences can be owned and remembered and used to create identity. But true recognition is so natural, so obvious, that there's nothing to grasp or claim. Third, genuine recognition doesn't solve your personality or eliminate your humanness. You still have preferences, patterns, reactions, and challenges. But you know yourself as that which is aware of these things rather than being identical to them. If you think awakening has made you emotionally invulnerable or psychologically perfect, you're probably in a spiritual fantasy rather than authentic recognition. Fourth, real recognition naturally leads to greater ordinariness, not greater specialness. You become more genuinely human, not superhuman, more authentic, not more impressive, more present, not more powerful. The ego wants awakening to make it special. True awakening reveals that consciousness is what's most ordinary and shared about us. Now, let me guide you through a practice that will help stabilize this recognition in your daily life. For the next week, several times each day, pause whatever you're doing and ask yourself, who or what is aware right now? Don't make this complicated. Don't look for a profound experience. Simply notice what's already present, the simple fact of being aware. When you're washing dishes, notice what's aware of the warm water and the soap bubbles. When you're stuck in traffic, notice what's aware of the frustration and the red lights. When you're falling asleep at night, Notice what's aware of the body settling and the thoughts slowing down. When you're waking up in the morning, notice what's aware of consciousness returning and the body stirring. What you'll begin to notice is that the same awareness is present in every experience. The awareness that's present when you're happy is the same awareness that's present when you're sad. The consciousness that witnesses success is the same consciousness that witnesses failure. That unchanging awareness, that's what you are, not the changing experiences, but that which remains constant through all change. This is not a technique to achieve something. It's a pointer to recognize what you already are. The more you notice this, the more natural it becomes to live from this recognition rather than from the story of being a separate person. As we prepare to close today's session, I want to share something with you that I consider one of the most important aspects of this path. Everything we've explored today, the recognition of your true nature, the shift in how you relate to emotions and relationships, the end of the seeking paradigm, all of this is meaningless unless it translates into how you actually live. The point is not to have beautiful spiritual insights that you remember fondly. The point is to live from your true nature so naturally that you forget you're doing anything special at all. Real integration happens not when you're meditating or listening to teachings, but when you're dealing with your difficult coworker, when you're stuck in line at the grocery store, when you're having an argument with your partner, when you're facing financial stress. These ordinary moments are where consciousness recognizes itself most authentically. Not because they're special, but because they're real. The spiritual ego loves retreat experiences and peak states, but consciousness is equally present in mundane experiences and ordinary states. Learning to recognize yourself in the boring, frustrating, and challenging moments, that's where this teaching becomes lived wisdom. I'll leave you with this contemplation for the week ahead. What if every person you encounter is consciousness exploring itself through that particular form? What if every situation you face is awareness investigating its own possibilities? What if every emotion you feel is your true nature experiencing itself subjectively? What if your entire life, every relationship, every challenge, every joy, every loss, is consciousness knowing itself more completely through your unique perspective? Don't make this into a belief. Let it be a lens through which you experiment with seeing. Notice how it changes your responses, your relationships, your sense of meaning and purpose. And remember, you are not practicing being consciousness. You are consciousness recognizing itself. The recognition is immediate. The living of that recognition, that's the real work, and it's the most natural thing you'll ever do. Rest in that recognition now. Nothing to achieve, nothing to become, simply what you already are, knowing itself as what you already are. Welcome back to this deepening exploration of what you truly are. As you settle into this moment, notice that same unchanging awareness that has been your constant companion throughout this entire journey. It was there when you first heard these teachings. It was there through every recognition, every resistance, every moment of clarity or confusion that followed. And it's here now, exactly the same, completely present. Today, we're going to explore something that will fundamentally alter your relationship with suffering, death, and what most people call the meaning of life. But first, I want to acknowledge what may have been happening in your direct experience since we last met. You might have begun noticing moments throughout your day when the sense of being a separate person simply wasn't there. Perhaps while looking at a sunset, or listening to music, or in deep conversation with a friend, you found yourself present, but without the usual narrator commenting on the experience. Or you might have discovered that some of your old problems seemed less compelling, not because they were solved, but because the one who had those problems felt somehow less solid, less real. These are signs that the recognition is stabilizing, not as an experience you have, but as the natural state you are. What you're discovering is that presence without a presenter, awareness without an awarer, is actually your most normal condition. The separate self that seems so real is actually the anomaly, the temporary cloud in an otherwise clear sky. But today, I need to share something with you that might initially seem disturbing, though it will ultimately prove to be the most liberating recognition possible. Everything you've ever been afraid of losing, your relationships, your achievements, your body, your memories, your very sense of existing as an individual, you have never actually possessed any of it. Not because these things don't matter, not because they're illusions, but because the you that thought it owned them was itself a temporary appearance in the consciousness that you actually are. Let me explain this carefully, because this is where many people either have their deepest awakening or their strongest resistance. Right now, bring to mind someone you love deeply. Feel that love. Notice the warmth, the care, the deep connection you feel with this person. Now, I want to ask you something that might seem strange. Where is that love located? Is it in your heart? Look carefully. The physical heart is pumping blood. The feeling of love. Where exactly is it? Is it in your mind? But thoughts about the person are different from the love itself. The love remains even when you're not thinking about them. Is it in your body? But you can feel love for someone who's thousands of miles away. How could your body contain something that reaches across space? What you're discovering is that love has no location, because love is the very nature of consciousness itself. You are not someone who loves. You are love appearing as someone. The person you love is not separate from this field of love consciousness that you are. They are the same love consciousness appearing in a different form. Your love for them is consciousness recognizing itself in what appeared to be another. This is why losing someone you love is so devastating, and simultaneously why that devastation can become a doorway to the deepest recognition. You're not actually losing another person. You're confronting the dissolution of the boundary between self and other that was never real to begin with. Let me share with you what happened when my teacher died, because it illustrates this principle in a way that changed my understanding of death, loss, and what we really are. I had been studying with him for 7 years. He was not just my spiritual guide, but had become like a father to me. When I received the call that he was dying, I flew immediately to be with him. I arrived at his bedside expecting to find a diminished man, someone suffering, someone fighting against his mortality. Instead, I found him more present, more radiant than I had ever experienced him. "Do you see?" he whispered when he noticed me crying. "Nothing real can die. What I truly am, what you truly are, it was never born. So it cannot die. Only the costume changes." I thought he was trying to comfort me, offering spiritual platitudes in the face of physical death. But as I sat with him through his final hours, I began to understand what he was pointing to. The awareness that had been expressing through his particular form. It wasn't disappearing. It was exactly the same awareness expressing through my form, through the nurse's form, through everyone who had ever been touched by his presence. When his breathing finally stopped, something remarkable happened. Instead of feeling like I had lost him, I felt like I had found him everywhere. He wasn't gone. The boundaries that had made him seem separate from everything else had dissolved, and now his essential nature was revealed as the same consciousness that was looking through my eyes, beating my heart, breathing my breath. In that moment, I realized that death is not the end of consciousness. It's the end of the illusion that consciousness was ever contained within the boundaries of a separate self. This recognition transforms everything about how you approach not just death, but life itself. When you realize that your essential nature was never born and cannot die, you stop living from the fear of non-existence. When you recognize that what you truly are pervades all experience, you stop trying to possess pieces of life and start participating fully in the wholeness of existence. But this raises a question that I know may be arising for you. If individual identity is temporary, if the separate self is an illusion, then what's the point of this human experience? Why does consciousness manifest as individuals at all? This is one of the deepest mysteries, and the answer is so simple that the mind initially rejects it. Consciousness manifests as individuals for the sheer joy of experiencing itself subjectively. Think about it. If you were infinite, eternal, unchanging awareness, how would you experience surprise? How would you know discovery? How would you feel the joy of learning, growing, creating, loving? You would create the appearance of limitation, so you could experience the joy of transcending it. You would create the illusion of separation, so you could experience the bliss of reunion. You would create the experience of seeking, so you could know the fulfillment of finding. Your entire human experience, every struggle, every triumph, every relationship, every loss, is consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through the lens of apparent limitation. You are not consciousness trapped in human form. You are consciousness joyfully expressing as human form, playing the magnificent game of forgetting and remembering what you are. This is why your individual life matters immensely and doesn't matter at all. It matters because it's consciousness knowing itself uniquely through your perspective. It doesn't matter because your essential nature is never threatened by what happens to your individual expression. Let me guide you into a direct exploration of this paradox. Close your eyes and rest in simple awareness. Don't create any particular state. Just notice the natural awareness that's already present. Now, while resting as this awareness, notice that thoughts are arising and dissolving within it. Don't follow the thoughts. Just notice that they come and go while awareness remains constant. Notice that sensations are appearing and disappearing in this same awareness. The feeling of your body sitting, sounds around you, perhaps emotions or physical sensations, all arising and dissolving in the unchanging field of consciousness that you are. Now notice that even the sense of being an individual person, your name, your history, your personality, your problems and goals, even this sense of being someone specific is arising within this awareness. Can you find where this sense of individual identity is located? Is it in your thoughts? But awareness is present when thoughts stop. Is it in your body? But you're aware of your body, so you must be something larger than your body. What you're discovering is that even your sense of being a separate person is a temporary appearance in the consciousness that you are, like a wave appearing in the ocean. Rest here for a moment. Let yourself be this vast, open, aware space in which all experience arises. Don't try to understand it, just be it. Beautiful. What you just experienced is a taste of what you are beyond the story of being someone. This isn't a special state you achieved. It's the natural condition that's always present, but usually overlooked. Now, as you return to ordinary awareness, notice that the individual sense of being you returns. But now, you know it as a temporary appearance rather than your ultimate identity. You can play the role of being a person while knowing yourself as the consciousness in which that person appears. This recognition changes everything about how you relate to your personal experiences. Your successes no longer inflate your ego because you know yourself as the consciousness in which success appears, not as someone who achieves success. Your failures no longer devastate you because you know yourself as the awareness witnessing failure, not as someone who fails. Your relationships no longer create dependency because you know yourself as the love in which relationship appears, not as someone who needs love from others. Your body's aging and eventual death no longer create existential terror because you know yourself as the consciousness that remains constant through all of the body's changes. But I want to be very clear about something, because this understanding is often misinterpreted in a way that creates spiritual bypassing rather than genuine freedom. Recognizing yourself as consciousness doesn't mean you stop caring about your human experience. It means you care more authentically because you're no longer caring from a position of desperate need. When you know that your essential nature is never threatened, you can love without the fear of loss, engage without the fear of failure, and create without the fear of judgment. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. Last year, I was working with a woman who had been struggling with her teenage daughter's rebellion. The daughter was experimenting with drugs, failing in school, and had become hostile and withdrawn from the family. This mother had tried everything: therapy, tough love, permissiveness, bribes, threats. Nothing worked, and she was consumed with worry, guilt, and fear for her daughter's future. During our session, I guided her through the recognition of her true nature as awareness. She saw clearly that she was not just a mother who might fail her child, but consciousness itself expressing as motherhood. "But how does this help my daughter?" she asked. "She's still doing drugs. She's still failing school." I invited her to look at her daughter not as a separate person who was making bad choices, but as consciousness exploring certain experiences through the form of a teenager. What if your daughter's rebellion is not something happening to you, but consciousness investigating its own relationship with authority and freedom? This shifted everything for her. Instead of relating to her daughter from fear and control, she began relating from curiosity and compassion. Instead of trying to fix her daughter, she became present with what her daughter was experiencing. The change was dramatic. Within weeks, her daughter began opening up to her, not because the mother had found new techniques, but because she was no longer approaching her daughter as a problem to be solved, but as consciousness to be met with consciousness. The drugs and school issues worked themselves out naturally as the daughter felt truly seen and accepted for the first time, rather than judged and managed. This is the power of relating from your true nature rather than from ego patterns. You become a space of unconditional presence rather than a person with an agenda. This brings us to what might be the most practical aspect of this entire teaching: how recognizing your true nature transforms your everyday decision-making. When you know yourself as consciousness, your choices begin arising from wisdom rather than from conditioned reactions. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you begin asking, "What wants to emerge through this situation?" Instead of trying to control outcomes, you become curious about what consciousness is exploring through these circumstances. Instead of defending positions, you become available for whatever truth wants to reveal itself. Let me give you a specific example from my own life that demonstrates this shift. 6 months ago, I was offered an opportunity to write a book with a major publisher. The advance was substantial, the platform was prestigious, and it would have significantly expanded my reach as a teacher. My old pattern would have been to analyze the pros and cons, to strategize about career advancement, to worry about the implications of saying yes or no. But instead, I sat quietly and listened from the deeper place. I asked not, "What do I want?" but "What does consciousness want to express through this opportunity?" What arose was a clear sense that this particular book, at this particular time, would be consciousness serving ego rather than ego serving consciousness. The message was valuable, but my motivation felt contaminated by the desire for recognition and financial security. So I declined the offer, and just like with the retreat I mentioned earlier, within days a different opportunity emerged that was perfectly aligned with authentic expression. A smaller publisher, less money, but a book that would come directly from genuine inspiration rather than from strategic thinking. This is what I call conscious decision-making, allowing choices to arise from your essential nature rather than forcing them through mental analysis. It doesn't mean you ignore practical considerations or become irresponsible. It means you include wisdom along with intelligence, inspiration along with strategy, being along with doing. When decisions arise from this deeper place, they have a quality of rightness that you can feel in your body, a sense of alignment that creates energy rather than depleting it. Now, I want to address something that becomes very important as this recognition deepens: the relationship between individual will and cosmic flow. One of the most common misunderstandings of non-dual recognition is the belief that if there's no separate self, then individual choice is meaningless. People sometimes fall into a kind of spiritual fatalism, thinking that everything is predetermined and personal effort is pointless. This misunderstands the nature of consciousness and how it expresses through individual forms. Yes, you are consciousness. Yes, your separate self is an illusion. But consciousness expresses itself through the mechanism of individual choice-making. Your personal will is not separate from cosmic will. It's cosmic will appearing as personal will. When you choose chocolate over vanilla, that's consciousness exploring preference through your form. When you decide to help someone in need, that's consciousness expressing compassion through your individual capacity for action. The illusion is not that choice happens, but that choice happens to a separate entity called you, who exists independently from the whole. Think of it like this: a wave doesn't choose to be wet. Wetness is the nature of water expressing as wave, but the wave does participate in where it breaks, how high it rises, what it carries toward shore. You don't choose to be conscious. Consciousness is your essential nature, but you do participate in how consciousness expresses through your particular form, what it creates through your unique capacities, how it serves through your individual life. This understanding liberates you from the burden of being solely responsible for your life, while empowering you to participate fully in consciousness, exploring itself through your circumstances. As this recognition stabilizes, you'll notice that you begin living in what I call effortless effort. Action happens naturally, arising from inspiration rather than compulsion. You find yourself doing exactly what needs to be done without the psychological struggle of forcing outcomes. But there's something subtle here that I want to make sure you understand, because it's the difference between authentic flow and spiritual bypassing. True effortless effort still requires discipline, practice, and conscious participation. The difference is that these arise from love rather than from should, from inspiration rather than from obligation, from natural impulse rather than from external pressure. For example, I maintain a regular meditation practice not because I should meditate, not because I'm trying to achieve some state, but because sitting in silence is how consciousness enjoys knowing itself through this form. I exercise regularly, not because I'm forcing myself to be healthy, but because physical vitality is how consciousness expresses aliveness through this body. I continue studying and learning, not because I'm trying to accumulate knowledge, but because curiosity and discovery are how consciousness explores itself through this mind. Everything becomes natural when it's aligned with your true nature, rather than imposed by external expectations or internal compulsions. This brings us to one of the most profound shifts that happens as this recognition deepens: the transformation of your relationship with time itself. Most of human suffering comes from the mind's habit of living in psychological time, comparing the present to the past, projecting fears and desires into the future, measuring progress, planning security, avoiding repetition of pain. But when you recognize yourself as consciousness, you discover that consciousness exists only now. Past and future are concepts arising in present awareness. Memory and imagination are present moment experiences. Let me guide you through an exploration that will make this viscerally clear. Right now, try to find the past. Not memories of the past, those are arising now. Not thoughts about what happened, those are present thoughts. Try to actually locate the past itself. Where is yesterday? Where is your childhood? Where are the experiences you had 5 minutes ago? Now, try to find the future. Not plans for the future. Those are arising now. Not anticipations or worries about what might happen. Those are present experiences. Try to locate the actual future. Where is tomorrow? Where are your goals? Where are the experiences you haven't had yet? What you're discovering is that past and future exist only as present moment mental constructs. Only this eternal now is ever actually happening. But here's what's profound. This isn't just a philosophical understanding. When you truly recognize that only now exists, your entire relationship with life transforms. You stop postponing happiness until conditions improve. You stop avoiding present discomfort by escaping into mental stories. You stop measuring your worth by past achievements or future potentials. You become available for the fullness of what's actually here in this moment as it is. This doesn't mean you stop planning or learning from experience, but planning happens now, and learning happens now, and both arise naturally from present moment awareness rather than from anxiety about time. I want to share something with you that happened during a retreat I was teaching last winter, because it illustrates how this shift in relationship with time can heal decades of psychological suffering in an instant. One of the participants was a man in his 60s who had been carrying tremendous guilt about mistakes he had made as a father 30 years earlier. He had been in therapy for decades, working on forgiveness, trying to make amends, but the guilt remained a constant source of suffering. During one of our sessions, I asked him to look directly for the person who had made those mistakes. "Where is that father from 30 years ago right now?" I asked. At first, he pointed to himself. "I'm that person. I did those things." "But look more carefully," I said. "The person who made those choices, can you find him right now? Not the memory of him, not the story about him, but the actual person." He was quiet for a long time. Then his face began to change. "He's not here," he whispered. "That person, he's gone. He existed then, but he's not here now." "And the guilt you've been carrying, who's carrying it?" I asked. Another long pause. "No one. The guilt is just arising in awareness right now, but there's no one here who actually did anything to feel guilty about." In that moment, 30 years of suffering dissolved, not because the past had been changed, not because the actions had been justified, but because the one who was suffering about the past was revealed to be a mental construction with no actual existence. He could still remember the events. He could still feel appropriate regret about choices that had caused harm. But the psychological torture of carrying those events as a burden on a continuing self that ended in the recognition that the self who was suffering was just another thought arising in present awareness. This is the power of recognizing the illusory nature of psychological time. It doesn't change the past or guarantee the future, but it ends the suffering about both. When you live from the recognition that only now exists, you can respond to life as it actually is rather than reacting to life as it was or might be. This is what I call temporal freedom, liberation from the prison of psychological time that keeps most people trapped in patterns of regret, anxiety, and postponed fulfillment. But as profound as this recognition is, there's an even deeper layer that I want to share with you before we close today's exploration. Everything we've discussed, the recognition of your true nature as consciousness, the understanding that separation is illusory, the freedom from psychological time, all of this points toward what might be the most transformative realization possible. You are not just consciousness. You are the consciousness in which the entire universe appears. This might sound grandiose or abstract, but I want you to examine your direct experience and see if this isn't exactly what's true. Right now, notice that everything you've ever experienced has appeared within your awareness. Every person you've known, every place you've visited, every thought you've had, every emotion you've felt, all of it arising within the field of consciousness that you are. From your perspective, the entire universe exists within your awareness. You've never experienced anything outside of consciousness. You've never encountered anything that wasn't appearing in the space of awareness. This isn't solipsism. It's not saying that only you exist. It's recognizing that the you that exists is not separate from the consciousness in which all existence appears. When this recognition stabilizes, you realize that you are not in the world. The world is in you. Not as possessions within a container, but as expressions within the infinite field of consciousness that you are. This completely transforms your sense of responsibility, intimacy, and participation in life. You're not trying to get something from the world to complete yourself. You're not defending yourself against a hostile environment. You're not seeking love from others to fill an internal lack. Instead, you recognize yourself as the source and substance of all experience. You become interested in how consciousness can know and express and serve itself more fully through the infinite diversity of its own expressions. This is what the mystics throughout history have pointed toward when they spoke of union with the divine, or realizing God consciousness, or achieving enlightenment. They weren't describing becoming something extraordinary. They were describing the recognition of what is most ordinary and fundamental about existence itself. You are the divine appearing as a human being. You are God consciousness exploring itself through individual perspective. You are the Buddha nature that all the teachings point toward, already fully present, already completely awake, simply not recognized. As we prepare to close today's exploration, I want to leave you with a practice that will help integrate these recognitions into your daily life. Throughout the week ahead, experiment with this perspective shift. Instead of seeing yourself as someone moving through experiences, see yourself as the space in which all experiences arise. When you're walking, don't experience yourself as someone walking through the world. Experience yourself as consciousness in which the experience of walking is appearing. When you're in conversation, don't experience yourself as someone talking to another person. Experience yourself as awareness in which dialogue is arising between two expressions of the same consciousness. When you're facing challenges, don't experience yourself as someone who has problems. Experience yourself as the spacious awareness in which the experience of problems is temporarily arising. This isn't a mental exercise or a way of thinking about things. It's a way of recognizing what's actually true about the structure of experience itself. The more you rest in this recognition, the more natural it becomes to live from your essential nature rather than from the story of being a separate self navigating an external world. Remember, you are not practicing being consciousness. You are consciousness recognizing itself as consciousness. The recognition is immediate and always available. What takes time is learning to live from this recognition instead of from the old patterns of identification. Be patient with this process. Be gentle with yourself as old patterns reassert themselves. Be amazed at how naturally this recognition wants to express itself through your unique way of being human. Most of all, trust your own direct experience more than any teaching, including these teachings. What you recognize as true in your own awareness, that is your ultimate authority. In our next exploration together, we'll go even deeper into how this recognition transforms your understanding of suffering, purpose, and what it means to serve consciousness, awakening to itself through the apparent multiplicity of existence. But for now, simply rest as what you are, the one who has been listening to these words, the awareness in which these recognitions have been arising, the consciousness that remains constant through every change. Rest as that. Welcome to this continuation of our deepening exploration of what you truly are. Notice right now what's aware of these words, the same awareness that has been present throughout this entire journey, unchanged by any recognition or resistance, any clarity or confusion. That awareness, that's what we're investigating today in a way that will challenge the very foundation of how you understand reality itself. In our previous explorations, you've begun to recognize yourself as consciousness rather than as someone who has consciousness. You've started to see that your essential nature exists only in the eternal now, beyond the psychological constructs of past and future. You've glimpsed that the entire universe appears within your awareness, rather than awareness existing within the universe. Today, we're going to explore something even more radical, something that will either catalyze the deepest awakening possible or trigger the strongest resistance you've yet encountered. Are you ready to discover that suffering is optional, not pain, not the natural responses of grief, sadness, or disappointment that arise when life doesn't match our preferences, but suffering, the psychological overlay that creates ongoing torment from temporary experiences? The Buddha called this the first noble truth. Life contains suffering, but what most people don't realize is that he also pointed to the complete elimination of suffering through the recognition of what you truly are. Let me share something that might initially seem impossible to believe. You have never actually suffered. The consciousness that you are, your essential nature, has never experienced psychological pain. What you've called your suffering has been a case of mistaken identity, like a movie screen, believing it's being burned by the images of fire projected upon it. The screen is never touched by what appears on it. The space in which clouds move is never disturbed by storms. The awareness in which suffering appears is never actually suffering. Let me guide you through a direct exploration of this right now. Bring to mind a recent situation that caused you emotional pain. Don't dive deep into the story. Just touch the edge of that memory and notice what arises. Feel whatever emotions come up. Let them be present. Don't resist them or analyze them. Now, while those emotions are present, ask yourself, what's aware of these feelings? Notice that there are the feelings, and there's the awareness of the feelings. These are two completely different phenomena. The feelings have texture, intensity, a beginning and an end. The awareness of the feelings is spacious, open, unchanging. The feelings come and go. The awareness remains constant. The feelings can be pleasant or unpleasant. The awareness is neither disturbed by unpleasant feelings nor dependent on pleasant ones. Now here's the recognition that changes everything. You are the awareness, not the feelings arising within it. When you truly see this, you realize that you've never actually suffered. Suffering has appeared in you, like weather in the sky, but you have never been suffering any more than the sky has ever been a storm. But wait, your mind might say, I felt that pain. It was real. It affected me. Yes, the pain was real. The emotions were authentic. The experience happened. But who you think experienced it? The separate self that felt victimized, damaged, or traumatized by what occurred. That entity was never real. Pain appeared in consciousness. Grief arose in awareness. Disappointment manifested within the field of your essential nature. But consciousness itself, awareness itself, your essential nature itself, never suffered. This is not spiritual bypassing or denial of your human experience. This is the recognition that liberates you to feel everything fully without being destroyed by what you feel. When you know yourself as the space in which emotions arise rather than as someone who has emotions, you can let grief be grief without becoming a grieving person. You can let anger be anger without becoming an angry person. You can let fear be fear without becoming a fearful person. The emotions become energy moving through consciousness rather than evidence of who you are or stories about what's wrong with your life. Let me share a story that illustrates this profound shift. 2 years ago, I received news that a very dear friend had died suddenly in an accident. The shock was intense. Waves of grief began moving through my system. Deep, primal, overwhelming sadness. In previous years, I would have become identified with that grief. I would have become someone who is grieving, someone who had lost a friend, someone who was dealing with tragedy. But this time, something different happened. As the grief arose, I found myself resting as the awareness in which grief was appearing. I could feel the intense emotional energy fully, perhaps more fully than ever before, but I wasn't becoming the grief. It was as if I was a vast, open space, and the grief was a powerful storm moving through that space. The storm was real, intense, demanding attention. But the space remained unshaken, undiminished, unharmed. From this place, I could honor my friend's memory completely. I could feel the depth of love that grief reveals. I could let the emotions move through their natural cycle without resistance. But I wasn't suffering about the grief. I wasn't making the grief mean something about life being unfair or about my inability to cope with loss. The grief was pure, clean, natural. It was consciousness experiencing the temporary absence of a beloved form. But there was no overlay of psychological suffering, no story about being victimized by life, no resistance to what had happened, no demand that reality be different than it was. This is the difference between pain and suffering. pain is the natural response of consciousness to certain experiences. Suffering is what happens when we resist pain, when we make pain mean something about who we are or how life should be. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, pain can arise and move through your system naturally, like weather through the sky. But the psychological structures that create ongoing suffering, the stories, the resistance, the identification with being a victim of circumstances, these dissolve in the light of recognition. You realize that life is not happening to you. Life is happening as you. You are not experiencing the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself subjectively through your particular perspective. This understanding completely transforms how you relate to what most people call negative emotions. Anger, for example, is often seen as something wrong, something to be controlled or eliminated. But when you recognize yourself as consciousness, you see that anger is just energy arising within awareness. It's not good or bad. It's information. Sometimes anger is consciousness recognizing that boundaries have been violated. Sometimes it's energy mobilizing for necessary action. Sometimes it's old patterns being triggered by present circumstances. When you're not identified with the anger, when you know yourself as the space in which anger arises, you can receive its information without being controlled by its energy. You can respond from wisdom rather than react from conditioning. The same is true for fear. Fear is often seen as evidence of weakness or as something to overcome. But fear is just consciousness recognizing potential threat and mobilizing energy for protection or avoidance. When you're not identified with fear, when you know yourself as that which is aware of fear, you can receive its guidance without being paralyzed by its intensity. This is what I call emotional transparency, the ability to feel emotions fully without being defined by them, to let them serve their natural function without being enslaved by their energy. But there's something even more profound that happens as this recognition deepens. You begin to realize that what you've called your problems were never actually problems. They were invitations. Every challenge you faced has been consciousness exploring its own capacity for wisdom, resilience, compassion, and creative response. Every difficulty has been a curriculum designed by awareness to know itself more completely. The difficult relationships weren't obstacles to your happiness. They were opportunities for consciousness to understand its own patterns and evolve its capacity for love. The financial struggles weren't evidence of your failure. They were consciousness exploring its relationship with security, abundance, and trust in the unknown. The health challenges weren't punishments from an unkind universe. They were consciousness investigating the relationship between awareness and embodiment, between the eternal and the temporal. From this perspective, your entire life story transforms from a narrative of problems and solutions to a recognition of consciousness exploring itself through the full spectrum of human experience. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking appropriate action to address challenges. It means you engage with life from a completely different foundation, not as someone trying to fix what's wrong, but as consciousness exploring what's possible. Let me give you a concrete example of how this shift changes practical decision-making. Last year, I was facing what appeared to be a significant financial crisis. Several sources of income had dried up simultaneously, and my savings were running low. My old pattern would have been to panic, to desperately seek new income streams, to worry about security and survival. Instead, I sat quietly and asked, what is consciousness exploring through this situation? What wants to emerge from this apparent limitation? What arose was not a strategy to solve the financial problem. but a recognition that this situation was inviting me to investigate my relationship with trust, with the unknown, with my willingness to live from inspiration rather than from security seeking. I realized that I had been making teaching decisions based on financial considerations rather than from authentic expression. The financial pressure was consciousness redirecting me toward more genuine service. So instead of frantically trying to generate income, I spent time clarifying what wanted to be expressed through my teaching, what authentic contribution was seeking to emerge. Within weeks, opportunities arose that were perfectly aligned with this deeper inspiration. Opportunities that provided not just adequate income, but a sense of meaningful contribution that I had been missing. This is what happens when you approach challenges as consciousness exploring rather than as a person having problems. Solutions arise from a deeper intelligence than the problem-solving mind can access. But perhaps the most profound transformation happens in your relationships when you stop seeing others as separate people and begin recognizing them as consciousness appearing in different forms. Think about someone in your life who triggers strong reactions in you. Perhaps someone you find difficult, annoying, or threatening. From the ego perspective, this person is an obstacle to your peace. They're someone you need to change, avoid, or protect yourself from. Their behavior affects your well-being, and your happiness depends partly on how they treat you. But from the recognition of your true nature, this person becomes your teacher, your mirror, your partner in consciousness awakening to itself. Their difficult behavior is showing you patterns of reaction that are ready to be seen and dissolved. Their triggers are revealing aspects of your conditioned personality that consciousness is ready to transcend. They're not doing something to you. They're participating with you in consciousness, exploring its own evolutionary potential. This doesn't mean you become a doormat or accept abusive behavior. It means you respond from wisdom rather than from reactive patterns. You set boundaries from love rather than from fear. You engage or disengage based on what serves consciousness awakening rather than on what protects ego comfort. When you relate from this recognition, something magical happens. People begin responding differently to you because you're no longer unconsciously asking them to be different than they are. You're meeting them as consciousness meeting consciousness, and that meeting has a transformative effect. Let me share something that happened in my own family that illustrates this principle. I have a brother who had been critical and dismissive of my spiritual path for years. Every family gathering became tense because he would make sarcastic comments about my teaching, question the value of meditation, and generally express skepticism about anything non-material. My old pattern was to defend spirituality, to try to convince him of its value, or to withdraw and feel hurt by his attacks. But as my recognition deepened, I began to see him differently. Instead of seeing him as someone who was attacking my beliefs, I began to see him as consciousness, exploring skepticism, materialism, and intellectual analysis, all valid ways that awareness investigates reality. I stopped taking his comments personally because I realized they weren't really about me. They were consciousness, using his form to examine its own relationship with the transcendent and the mundane. This shift in my perception changed everything. Instead of defending or withdrawing, I became genuinely curious about his perspective. Instead of trying to convert him to my understanding, I began appreciating the intelligence of his questions. The tension dissolved because I was no longer unconsciously asking him to validate my path. I was simply present with him as he was, appreciating the unique way consciousness was expressing through his particular form. The result was profound. Not only did our relationship heal, but he began showing genuine interest in contemplative practices, not because I had convinced him, but because he felt truly accepted for the first time and could therefore relax his defensive patterns. This is the power of what I call recognition-based relating, meeting others from the understanding that you are both expressions of the same consciousness rather than separate entities trying to get something from each other. But I want to address something that often arises as people begin to embody this understanding more deeply. There can be a period of disorientation as the old identity structures begin to dissolve and the new recognition hasn't yet stabilized. You might feel like you're losing yourself, losing your edge, losing what made you unique and motivated. This is completely natural and temporary. What you're actually losing is the false self that was built on separation, conflict, and psychological need. What you're gaining is access to your authentic nature, which is far more creative, powerful, and unique than any constructed identity could ever be. The ego fears this dissolution because it interprets it as death. But what's dying is not your true self. It's the limitation that was hiding your true self. Think of it like a caterpillar dissolving in a chrysalis. From the caterpillar's perspective, this dissolution might feel like annihilation, but from a larger perspective, it's transformation into something far more beautiful and free. During this transition period, it's important to be patient with yourself. The old patterns will reassert themselves periodically. You might find yourself falling back into separation-based thinking, reactive emotions, or ego-driven decisions. This is not failure, it's part of the integration process. Each time you recognize that you've lost touch with your true nature and gently return to it, the recognition becomes more stable and natural. What helps during this period is what I call identity lightness, holding your human personality lightly while resting as consciousness. You can still play your roles, express your preferences, and engage your talents. But you know these are temporary costumes rather than your essential nature. This leads to what might be the most practical question. How do you live in the world from this recognition? How do you pay bills when you know yourself as consciousness? How do you make decisions when the separate decision maker is revealed as illusory? How do you maintain relationships when the boundaries between self and other dissolve? The answer is simpler than the mind expects and more natural than the ego imagines. You live from the understanding that consciousness is expressing itself through your individual form, and you become curious about what wants to emerge through that expression. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you ask, "What wants to emerge?" Instead of planning from fear or ambition, you listen for the authentic impulse that arises from your essential nature. Instead of forcing outcomes, you participate skillfully in whatever is unfolding. This doesn't make you passive or indecisive. If anything, it makes you more responsive and effective because you're operating from the deeper intelligence of consciousness rather than from the limited perspective of the separate self. Decisions arise more quickly and with greater clarity because they're not filtered through layers of self-doubt, comparison, or strategic calculation. Action happens naturally because it's aligned with the deeper flow of life rather than opposed to it. Let me share how this looks in practical terms. When I wake up in the morning, instead of immediately launching into my planned activities, I take a few moments to listen. What wants to emerge through this day? What is consciousness seeking to explore or express through this form? Sometimes what arises matches my previous plans. Sometimes it suggests a completely different approach. Sometimes it invites rest when I had planned activity, or activity when I had planned rest. This listening is not mystical or supernatural. It's simply awareness checking in with itself. Consciousness consulting its own deeper wisdom before engaging with the day's activities. When I'm in conversation, instead of focusing on what I want to say or how I want to be perceived, I listen for what wants to be communicated. What truth wants to emerge through this dialogue? What healing or recognition wants to happen through this meeting? When I'm teaching, instead of delivering prepared material, I remain present to what consciousness wants to transmit through this particular group in this specific moment. The teaching becomes alive because it's emerging fresh rather than being repeated from memory. This way of living requires trust, not blind faith, but the earned trust that comes from repeatedly witnessing consciousness expressing wisdom through your willingness to listen and respond. The more you live from this place, the more you discover that consciousness has intelligence far beyond what the personal mind can access. It knows things you don't know, sees connections you can't see, and can navigate complexity in ways that strategic thinking cannot match. But I want to address a common misunderstanding about this way of living. Some people interpret following consciousness as an excuse for avoiding responsibility or making impulsive decisions. They might quit their job abruptly because it doesn't feel aligned, or abandon commitments because they no longer feel inspired. This is not wisdom, it's spiritual immaturity masquerading as awakening. True alignment with consciousness includes responsibility, integrity, and consideration for how your choices affect others. It includes honoring commitments even when they no longer feel exciting. It includes doing what needs to be done even when it's not what you prefer to do. The difference is that these responsibilities are held lightly rather than heavily. You fulfill them from love rather than from obligation, from service rather than from duty. You honor commitments because consciousness values integrity, not because you're trapped by past decisions. You consider others' needs because consciousness recognizes itself in all forms, not because you're trying to be a good person. This mature expression of awakening is what allows you to be fully human while knowing yourself as consciousness. You can be a responsible parent, employee, or citizen while understanding that these roles are temporary expressions of your eternal nature. You can care deeply about outcomes while knowing that your essential well-being doesn't depend on any particular result. You can work skillfully toward goals while understanding that your true completion doesn't come from achievement. As this recognition deepens and stabilizes, you'll discover something beautiful. Life becomes simpler even as it becomes richer. Simpler because you're no longer maintaining the complex psychological structures of the separate self, the constant comparison, the endless strategizing, the chronic worry about security and approval. Richer because you're available for the full depth of each experience. Without the filter of separation, you can taste life more fully, love more completely, create more authentically. You'll also discover that your capacity to serve others expands naturally. When you're no longer preoccupied with protecting or promoting a separate self, tremendous energy becomes available for contribution. But this service has a different quality than ego-driven helping. It's not based on guilt, obligation, or the need to be seen as good. It arises spontaneously from the recognition that serving consciousness in any form is the most natural and fulfilling expression possible. You might find yourself drawn to activities you never considered before, or expressing existing talents in completely new ways. The creativity that emerges from consciousness recognizing itself is unlimited because it's not constrained by personal history or social conditioning. This is what I call authentic expression. Consciousness using your unique form to contribute something that has never existed before and will never exist again. Now, As we near the end of today's exploration, I want to share something that happened during a retreat last month that perfectly illustrates how profound this recognition can be when it's embodied rather than just understood intellectually. A woman approached me during a break and said, "I think I understand what you're pointing to, but I don't feel any different. My life still has the same challenges. I still get triggered by the same things. How do I know if this recognition is real?" I asked her to sit with me for a moment and simply be present. We sat quietly for perhaps 2 minutes. Then I asked, "In this moment, right now, what problems do you have?" She started to answer with her usual list: relationship issues, work stress, health concerns. But then she stopped and was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Right now, in this moment, there are no problems. There's just sitting here, being aware." "And who is aware?" I asked. "No one," she said immediately, surprising herself. "There's just awareness." "And what is the nature of this awareness?" Another pause. "It's peaceful, open. It doesn't need anything." "That awareness, is it different from what you are?" She looked at me with wonder. "No, that's what I am. That's what I've always been." In that moment, she moved from understanding the teaching to recognizing her true nature. The shift was palpable, not just to her, but to everyone in the room. The problems didn't disappear from her life circumstances. The triggers didn't magically stop appearing. But the one who had problems, the one who got triggered, she was revealed to be a temporary appearance in the consciousness that she actually was. This is the recognition that changes everything. Not the circumstances, but the one who experiences circumstances. Not the content of life, but the context in which life appears. As you continue integrating this recognition, remember that it's not about perfecting yourself or transcending your humanity. It's about recognizing what you are while being perfectly human. Your personality will remain. Your preferences will continue. Your unique way of being in the world will persist. But all of this will be held within the vast spaciousness of your true nature, rather than being the narrow confines of your identity. For this week's integration, I invite you to experiment with what I call identity questions. Throughout your day, when you notice yourself getting caught in old patterns or reactive emotions, pause and ask, who is experiencing this right now? Don't answer conceptually. Look directly for the one who is having the experience. Where is this experiencer located? Again, don't think about it. Try to find the actual location of the one who experiences. What is the nature of that which is aware of this whole situation? Rest in whatever is discovered through this inquiry. These questions point you back to your essential nature again and again, creating grooves of recognition that gradually become more natural than identification with temporary experiences. Remember, you are not trying to get rid of your humanity or transcend your individual expression. You are learning to live as consciousness while expressing through your unique human form. In our next exploration together, we'll dive into the deepest mystery of all: why consciousness appears to manifest as multiplicity when its nature is unity, and how understanding this transforms your sense of purpose and service in the world. But for now, rest as what you have always been, the aware presence in which all experience arises, the consciousness that is both the source and substance of everything you've ever known. Notice that this awareness needs nothing, lacks nothing, and is disturbed by nothing. It is complete exactly as it is, and you are that. Rest there, be that, know yourself as that. Welcome back to this deepening recognition of what you truly are. As you settle into this moment, notice something remarkable. The awareness that greets you now is the same awareness that has been present throughout this entire journey. It hasn't evolved, improved, or become more enlightened. It hasn't been affected by any of the recognitions, insights, or transformations that may have occurred. This unchanging awareness, this is what you are. Not the person who has been learning, but the consciousness in which all learning appears. Today, we're going to explore the deepest mystery of existence itself, a mystery that, once understood, will transform not only how you see yourself, but how you understand the very purpose of the universe. Why does the one appear as many? Why does consciousness, which is inherently unified and complete, manifest as billions of apparently separate beings? Why does the infinite express itself through the finite? Why does the eternal play in time? This is not merely a philosophical question. Understanding this mystery is the key to discovering your true purpose, your authentic contribution, and why your individual life matters infinitely while mattering not at all. But before we dive into this deepest teaching, I want to acknowledge something that may be happening as this recognition stabilizes in your direct experience. You might be finding that life has begun organizing itself around different principles. Instead of constantly seeking to get something, security, approval, pleasure, achievement, you may notice a natural impulse to give something, to express something, to serve something larger than personal survival or success. This is not a moral improvement or spiritual development. This is consciousness recognizing its own nature and naturally expressing as generosity, creativity, and service, because these are the inherent qualities of awareness itself. Let me share what happened in my own life when this shift became undeniable. About 4 years ago, I was living quite comfortably. My teaching had reached a level where financial security was no longer a concern. I had a beautiful home, meaningful relationships, and the respect of peers in the spiritual community. By most measures, I had achieved what many would consider success. But something was stirring beneath this surface satisfaction. Not dissatisfaction. The recognition of my true nature had ended the seeking that creates chronic dissatisfaction. Rather, it was something like a creative restlessness, a sense that consciousness wanted to express itself more fully through this particular form. One morning during meditation, something became crystal clear. I was not consciousness having achieved a comfortable life. I was consciousness using the experience of comfort to prepare for a deeper level of service. The financial security wasn't meant to be hoarded or enjoyed privately. It was meant to provide a foundation from which authentic expression could emerge without the distortion of survival concerns. The respect and recognition weren't meant to feed my ego or establish my spiritual status. They were meant to create a platform from which deeper truths could be transmitted. Within weeks of this recognition, I found myself making choices that would have terrified my ego just months before. I turned down lucrative opportunities that weren't aligned with authentic expression. I began teaching in contexts that offered no financial compensation, but allowed for deeper transmission. I started sharing teachings that challenged comfortable spiritual concepts rather than confirming familiar beliefs. From the ego's perspective, I was risking everything I had worked to achieve. From consciousness's perspective, I was finally allowing authentic expression to emerge unimpeded by personal concerns. The result was not loss, but expansion. Not decreased security, but increased aliveness. Not less recognition, but deeper impact. When consciousness expresses authentically through individual form, it naturally attracts whatever is needed to support that expression. This is what I want to share with you about purpose and service, because it's radically different from how these concepts are usually understood. Most people think of purpose as something they need to find or discover, as if it's hidden somewhere, waiting to be uncovered through spiritual seeking or psychological analysis. But when you recognize yourself as consciousness, you realize that you don't have a purpose. You are consciousness's purpose expressing through this particular form. You are not someone who serves consciousness. You are consciousness serving itself through the mechanism of individual expression. This completely transforms the question from, "What is my purpose?" to, "What does consciousness want to express through this unique configuration of qualities, experiences, and capacities?" Your individual characteristics, your talents, your history, your personality, even your wounds and limitations, these are not accidents or obstacles. They are consciousness's chosen instruments for a specific type of expression that has never existed before and will never exist again. The artist in you is consciousness exploring beauty through creative form. The parent in you is consciousness investigating love through nurturing relationship. The teacher in you is consciousness awakening to itself through the mirror of instruction. Even your struggles and failures serve this greater expression. The parts of your personality that seem problematic, the patterns you've tried unsuccessfully to change, the wounds that haven't healed despite years of therapy, these too are part of consciousness's chosen equipment for its expression through your form. Let me give you an example that might surprise you. For most of my life, I struggled with what I considered a debilitating sensitivity. Crowds overwhelmed me. Loud environments exhausted me. I absorbed the emotions of others so intensely that it was sometimes difficult to distinguish between their feelings and mine. I spent years trying to develop better boundaries, to become more resilient, to overcome what I saw as a weakness that limited my effectiveness in the world. But as my recognition deepened, I began to see this sensitivity differently. It wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a precision instrument consciousness was using for specific kinds of perception and service. This sensitivity allows me to feel into the subtle energetic states of people I'm working with. It enables me to sense when someone is ready for a particular teaching, or when they need something different than what they're asking for. It creates a quality of presence that people find healing even before any words are spoken. What I had been trying to fix was actually consciousness's chosen capacity for a specific type of service. My attempts to change it had been like a violin trying to become a drum, missing the unique contribution that only a violin can make. This is true for every aspect of your individual configuration. Your intensity, your gentleness, your analytical mind, your emotional depth, your skepticism, your faith, your introversion, your extroversion. All of it is consciousness's chosen equipment for the particular expression seeking to emerge through you. This understanding dissolves the exhausting project of self-improvement that occupies so much human energy. You don't need to become someone else to fulfill your purpose. You need to become more fully who you already are, understanding that who you are is consciousness expressing through this specific configuration of qualities. But here's where it gets profound. When you truly understand this, you realize that your individual expression serves not just your personal fulfillment, but the evolution of consciousness itself. Every experience you have, every choice you make, every relationship you engage, every challenge you face, all of it is consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through the lens of apparent limitation. When you love deeply, consciousness is investigating the nature of unity through the vehicle of relationship. When you create art, Consciousness is exploring beauty through the medium of form. When you face loss, consciousness is examining impermanence through the experience of attachment and letting go. Even your mistakes and failures serve this greater exploration. When you act from ego rather than awareness, consciousness is learning about the mechanics of separation. When you choose fear over love, consciousness is studying the dynamics of contraction and expansion. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is meaningless. Every moment of your individual existence is consciousness gathering experience about its own infinite possibilities. This brings us to one of the most transformative recognitions possible. You are not just living your life. You are consciousness living itself through the story of your individual existence. This doesn't diminish the importance of your personal experience. If anything, it reveals why every detail of your life matters infinitely. You are not a random person having random experiences. You are the infinite exploring itself through the specific lens of your unique perspective. But this also reveals why your personal experience matters not at all from another perspective. What you think is your individual story is actually consciousness's story. What you think are your personal achievements or failures are actually consciousness's exploration of possibility and limitation. When you truly understand this, the most profound peace becomes possible. You can care deeply about your life while holding it lightly. You can engage fully in your individual expression while knowing it as a temporary appearance in eternal awareness. You can love completely without possessiveness because you know that what you love is consciousness appearing as beloved. You can create wholeheartedly without attachment because you know that what creates through you is consciousness exploring its own creative potential. Let me share a story that illustrates how this understanding transforms everyday experience. Last summer, I was teaching at a retreat center in the mountains. One afternoon, I was walking alone on a forest path when I came upon a small clearing where a tree had recently fallen. The forest was in the process of reclaiming the space, with new growth emerging from the decaying wood. As I stood there, something extraordinary happened. The sense of being a separate person walking in a forest simply dissolved. There was no me observing nature. There was just one consciousness appearing as forest, as sunlight, as the sound of wind through leaves, as the awareness taking it all in. In that moment, I realized viscerally what I had been teaching conceptually for years. I wasn't a person having a spiritual experience in nature. I was nature itself, consciousness appearing as forest and simultaneously as the appreciation of forest. The beauty I was witnessing was consciousness delighting in its own creative expression. The peace I was feeling was consciousness recognizing its own essential nature. The love that arose was consciousness embracing itself in all its forms. This recognition didn't last in its full intensity, but it left an indelible understanding. Every experience since then has been touched by this knowing that what appears to be happening to me is actually consciousness exploring itself through the mechanism of individual perspective. When I teach now, I know that consciousness is teaching itself through this form to itself in other forms. When I love, I know that consciousness is loving itself through the appearance of relationship. When I face challenges, I know that consciousness is examining its own capacity for wisdom and resilience. This understanding naturally leads to what might be the most important question of all. If you are consciousness expressing itself through individual form, what does consciousness want to express through your specific configuration? This is not a question you answer with your mind. It's a question you live with your entire being. It requires a kind of listening that goes deeper than thought, deeper than emotion, deeper than personal preference. It's the listening that asks, what wants to emerge through this life that has never been expressed before? For some, this might be a traditional form of service, healing, teaching, creating, nurturing. For others, it might be something completely unique that has no established category. For some, the authentic expression might be bold and visible. For others, it might be quiet and hidden, like the mycelial networks that connect forests beneath the soil. What matters is not the form of the expression, but the authenticity of it, whether it arises from genuine recognition of your true nature or from conditioned patterns of seeking approval, security, or specialness. Let me guide you through an exploration that can help clarify what consciousness wants to express through your particular form. Sit comfortably and close your eyes. Rest in the simple awareness of being aware. Don't create any special state. Just notice the natural presence that's always here. From this place of natural awareness, bring to mind a moment in your life when you felt most authentically yourself. Not when you were most successful or most approved of, but when you felt most genuinely expressive of something essential in your nature. Feel into the quality of that moment. What was being expressed through you? What was consciousness exploring through that particular experience? Notice that this authentic expression didn't feel effortful or forced. It arose naturally, like a flower blooming or a river flowing. Now ask, what is the essence of what was being expressed in that moment? Don't answer with your mind. Let the answer arise from the same depth that the authentic expression came from. Now expand this inquiry. How does this essential quality want to express itself in my life now? What forms does it want to take? What service does it want to offer? Again, don't think your way to answers. Let consciousness reveal its intentions through your willingness to listen. Beautiful. What you've just touched is consciousness clarifying its own expression through your individual form. This is not something you need to figure out or achieve. It's something that wants to emerge naturally when you create space for authentic expression. But I want to address something that often arises when people begin to sense their authentic expression more clearly. There can be fear about whether you're capable of embodying what consciousness wants to express through you. The mind might say, I don't have the skills for this, or I'm not qualified for this level of service, or what if I fail? These fears arise from the mistaken assumption that you are responsible for creating the expression rather than being the vehicle through which it emerges. When consciousness expresses through individual form, it provides everything necessary for that expression. The skills develop naturally. The opportunities arise organically. The capacity grows in proportion to what's being asked. You don't need to be perfect or fully prepared before authentic expression can emerge. You need only to be willing to let consciousness use whatever capacities you currently have while remaining open to the development of whatever capacities are needed. I learned this lesson powerfully about 6 years ago when I was invited to lead a retreat for people facing terminal illness, something I had never done before and felt completely unprepared for. My mind immediately created a list of reasons why I wasn't qualified. I wasn't a doctor, therapist, or hospice worker. I had limited personal experience with serious illness. I didn't have training in grief counseling or end-of-life care. But when I sat quietly and listened from my essential nature, there was a clear sense that this invitation was consciousness exploring its relationship with mortality through my particular form, and that whatever was needed for authentic service would be provided. I said yes to the invitation, and something remarkable unfolded. The retreat became one of the most powerful teaching experiences of my life. Not because I had special knowledge about illness or death, but because consciousness used the encounter with mortality to reveal its own eternal nature with extraordinary clarity. The participants didn't need expert knowledge about dying. They needed recognition of what in them was beyond birth and death. They didn't need techniques for managing terminal illness. They needed to remember their essential nature as the awareness in which all experience, including illness, arises. What I thought was my lack of qualification became the perfect qualification. Because I wasn't approaching their situation as an expert with answers, I was present with them as consciousness recognizing itself in the face of apparent ending. The retreat became a profound exploration of what it means to live fully while dying, to love completely while losing, to find peace in the midst of physical disintegration. It wasn't my retreat. It was consciousness teaching itself about its own deathless nature through the circumstances of terminal diagnosis. This taught me something essential about authentic service. It's not about having the right credentials or being personally qualified for what consciousness wants to express through you. It's about being willing to be used by awareness for its own deeper purposes. When you offer yourself as a vehicle for consciousness, rather than trying to serve consciousness from your personal capacities, extraordinary things become possible. But this requires what I call egoic transparency, being willing to let consciousness work through you, even when you don't understand how or why, even when it challenges your self-image or pushes against your comfort zones. Most people want to serve consciousness on their own terms, in ways that feel safe and familiar, using capacities they already know they possess. But consciousness often wants to express through us in ways that stretch us beyond what we think we're capable of. This is because consciousness is not trying to confirm what you already are. It's trying to explore what's possible through your willingness to be more than you think you are. Your individual limitations become doorways for consciousness to discover its own unlimited nature. Your personal wounds become openings for consciousness to explore its own healing capacity. Your fears become invitations for consciousness to examine its own courage. This brings us to what might be the most challenging aspect of living as conscious expression: the willingness to let consciousness use your life for purposes that transcend your personal preferences and plans. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning discernment. It means holding your personal will within the larger context of consciousness's deeper intentions. Sometimes, what consciousness wants to express through you aligns perfectly with your personality's preferences. Sometimes it requires you to stretch beyond your comfort zone. Sometimes it asks you to serve in ways that the ego finds threatening or unrewarding. The key is learning to distinguish between authentic guidance arising from your essential nature and conditioning arising from psychological patterns. Authentic guidance has a quality of rightness that you can feel in your body, even when it's challenging or unexpected. It creates energy rather than depleting it. It feels aligned with your deepest values, even when it conflicts with surface preferences. Conditioning, on the other hand, creates internal conflict. It feels forced or effortful. It's usually based on seeking something: approval, security, specialness, rather than expressing something authentic. As you develop sensitivity to this distinction, you'll find that following authentic guidance becomes natural, even when it leads in unexpected directions. But there's something else I need to share about this process of becoming a conscious vessel for awareness to express itself. the more authentically consciousness expresses through your individual form, the more you realize that this expression is not ultimately about you or for you. It's consciousness serving its own awakening throughout the apparent multiplicity of existence. Your individual expression becomes part of a vast, interconnected web of consciousness awakening to itself through countless forms and perspectives. The teacher is consciousness awakening to itself through the mechanism of instruction. The student is consciousness awakening to itself through the mechanism of learning. The teaching itself is consciousness recognizing its own nature through the vehicle of communication. The healer is consciousness exploring its own healing nature through service to apparent others. The one being healed is consciousness examining its own capacity for wholeness through the experience of woundedness and recovery. When you truly see this, individual achievement loses its compelling quality, but individual expression becomes infinitely meaningful. You're not trying to become successful or significant as a separate person. You're participating in consciousness's grand exploration of its own infinite potential through the beautiful limitation of individual perspective. This creates what I call egoless engagement, full participation in life without the psychological weight of personal investment in outcomes. You can work with complete dedication, knowing that the results belong to consciousness, not to you. You can love with total commitment, knowing that the love is consciousness loving itself through the appearance of relationship. You can create with absolute passion, knowing that the creativity is consciousness exploring its own unlimited potential through finite form. This understanding transforms not only your relationship with your own expression, but with everyone else's as well. When you recognize that every person is consciousness exploring itself through their unique configuration of qualities and experiences, judgment becomes impossible and appreciation becomes natural. The person whose expression triggers your criticism is consciousness, investigating certain possibilities through their particular form. The person whose achievements provoke your envy is consciousness exploring different capacities through their individual configuration. Even those who seem to be expressing unconsciously through destructive behaviors, selfish actions, or harmful choices are still consciousness exploring aspects of itself, even if through the mechanism of apparent forgetfulness of its true nature. This doesn't mean you condone harmful behavior or avoid appropriate boundaries, but it means you can respond to unconscious expression from consciousness rather than reacting from ego. You can offer conscious response to unconscious expression without taking it personally, without making it mean something about you or about the inherent nature of the person acting unconsciously. This is what I call universal compassion, not the emotion of feeling sorry for others, but the recognition that every expression, conscious or unconscious, is consciousness exploring its own nature through the endless diversity of individual forms. From this perspective, your role becomes clear: to express as consciously as possible while meeting others exactly where they are in their own process of recognition. Sometimes this means offering direct teaching about the nature of consciousness. Sometimes it means providing practical help with immediate needs. Sometimes it means simply being present as an example of what becomes possible when individual expression aligns with essential nature. But perhaps the most profound service you can offer is the transmission of your own recognition through the quality of your presence. When you live from the understanding that you are consciousness expressing through individual form, this understanding is communicated through everything you do, say, and simply are. People feel it in your presence even when no words are spoken. They sense the peace that comes from knowing yourself as awareness rather than identifying as content within awareness. They're touched by the freedom that emerges from understanding your essential nature as unassailable by any external circumstance. This transmission happens automatically when the recognition is genuine. It's not something you try to project or perform. It's the natural radiation of consciousness, recognizing itself through your particular form. In our final exploration together, we'll go into the deepest implications of this recognition, what it means for your understanding of death, the ultimate purpose of existence, and how this awakening serves not just individual liberation, but the evolution of consciousness itself throughout all apparent forms. For now, let me leave you with a practice that will help stabilize this understanding of yourself as conscious expression rather than as someone seeking consciousness. Throughout this week, experiment with this shift in identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who meditates, see yourself as consciousness exploring stillness through the form of meditation practice. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who works, see yourself as consciousness exploring creativity, service, or contribution through the vehicle of professional activity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone in relationship, see yourself as consciousness investigating love, intimacy, and connection through the mechanism of interpersonal engagement. Instead of seeing yourself as someone with problems, see yourself as consciousness examining its own capacity for wisdom and resilience through the curriculum of apparent challenges. This is not a mental exercise, but a recognition of what's actually true about the structure of experience itself. Notice how this shift changes your relationship to whatever you're engaged with. Notice how it affects your sense of purpose, your level of peace, your capacity for authentic response. Most importantly, notice how it reveals that what you thought was your individual life is actually consciousness living itself through the story of your personal existence. Rest in this recognition. You are not someone seeking to serve consciousness. You are consciousness serving itself through the magnificent vehicle of your individual expression. Let that truth settle into every cell, every thought, every breath. Let it transform how you see your past, your present, and all the possibilities that remain to be explored through your unique configuration of being. Welcome to this final recognition of what you have always been and will always be. Notice right now the awareness that has remained unchanged through every word of this entire journey. It was present at the very beginning when you first heard these teachings. It was there through every moment of recognition, every instance of resistance, every glimpse of your true nature. And it's here now, exactly the same, completely untouched by anything that has appeared within it. That awareness is not something you've developed or achieved. It's what you are. It's what you've always been. It's what you could never not be. Today, we explore the deepest mystery of all. Not just what you are, but why you temporarily forgot what you are, and why this forgetting and remembering serves the very evolution of consciousness itself. What I'm about to share with you will not only complete your understanding of your own nature, but reveal why your individual awakening matters for the awakening of all apparent beings throughout all time and space. Let me begin with something that might seem impossible to believe, yet is verifiably true in your own direct experience. You have never actually been born, and you will never actually die. Birth and death are events that happen to the body-mind organism, but you, the consciousness aware of these words right now, you exist before birth, during life, and after death. You are the eternal constant in which the temporary story of individual existence appears. Right now, try to remember the moment of your birth. You can't, because the awareness you are existed before the brain that creates memories was even formed. You have no memory of coming into existence because you never came into existence. You are existence itself, temporarily appearing as a human being. Similarly, you will have no experience of ceasing to exist because the consciousness you are cannot cease. What can cease is the particular configuration of body and mind through which consciousness is currently expressing, but consciousness itself, your essential nature, is deathless. This is not a consoling belief or spiritual philosophy. This is the most practical recognition possible, because when you truly understand that you cannot die, you discover that you have never actually been in danger. Every fear you've ever experienced, every anxiety about the future, every desperate attempt to secure yourself against loss, all of it has been based on the fundamental misunderstanding that you are something that can be threatened. But if you cannot be threatened, if your essential nature is indestructible, if what you are transcends birth and death, then what has your life actually been about? This brings us to the ultimate recognition, one that will transform not only how you see your own existence, but how you understand the very purpose of the universe itself. You are not consciousness that happened to be born as a human being. You are consciousness that chose to temporarily forget its infinite nature in order to experience the joy of remembering it. Every lifetime, every experience, every apparent journey from ignorance to awakening is consciousness playing the magnificent game of losing itself in order to find itself. Think about the most compelling games you've ever played. What made them engaging? The challenge, the uncertainty, the possibility of both success and failure. A game where you knew the outcome from the beginning would be boring. Now imagine being infinite, omniscient consciousness with unlimited power and eternal existence. How would you create the experience of discovery? How would you generate the thrill of learning something new? How would you experience the joy of overcoming limitation? You would temporarily limit yourself. You would create the experience of being separate, mortal, and seeking. You would forget your unlimited nature just long enough to experience the ecstasy of remembering it. This is what your entire human experience has been. Consciousness joyfully exploring its own nature through the adventure of temporary forgetfulness and ultimate remembering. But here's what makes this recognition so profound. You haven't been playing this game alone. Every person you've ever met, every being you've ever encountered, every consciousness that appears separate from you, all of them are the same awareness you are, playing the same game of forgetting and remembering. Your mother, your father, your children, your friends, your enemies, your teachers, your students, all of them are you, consciousness, appearing in different costumes, playing different roles in the grand drama of awakening to what you are. This means that every relationship you've ever had has been consciousness relating to itself. Every love you've experienced has been consciousness loving itself. Every conflict has been consciousness exploring the dynamics of apparent separation and eventual reunion. The person who hurt you most deeply was you, consciousness, investigating the experience of pain and forgiveness. The person who loved you most completely was you, consciousness, exploring the nature of unity through the vehicle of relationship. When this recognition becomes viscerally real, not just as an understanding, but as a lived knowing, something extraordinary happens. Forgiveness becomes effortless because you realize there was never anyone to forgive, only consciousness playing all the roles in its own awakening drama. Gratitude becomes limitless because you realize that every experience, pleasant or painful, has been consciousness offering itself gifts of recognition through the mechanism of apparent otherness. Love becomes unconditional because you recognize that there is literally nothing that is not you. Consciousness, appearing in temporary form. Let me share something that happened during a meditation retreat last year that illustrates how profound this recognition can be. I was sitting in the meditation hall with about 50 other practitioners. We had been in silence for 3 days, and the atmosphere was very deep, very still. Suddenly, without any effort or intention, the boundaries between self and other simply dissolved. It wasn't that I expanded to include everyone else. It was that the I that could expand or contract was revealed to be completely imaginary. There was just one consciousness appearing as 50 different meditation postures, 50 different breathing patterns, 50 different processes of recognition. The apparent multiplicity was like waves on an ocean, countless different forms, but all made of the same water. But what was most remarkable was recognizing that this had always been true. The boundaries I had been experiencing my entire life, between myself and others, between inside and outside, between observer and observed, they had been optical illusions created by consciousness for the sake of experiencing diversity within unity. In that moment, I understood why consciousness creates the appearance of separation, not as a mistake or a fall from grace, but as the most brilliant creative act possible, the generation of infinite perspectives through which to know and appreciate its own unlimited nature. Every person in that hall, every person who has ever lived, every consciousness that will ever appear, all of them are unique windows through which the one awareness experiences and understands itself. This recognition answers what might be the deepest question of human existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does consciousness manifest at all when it's already complete as pure awareness? The answer is so simple, so beautiful, that the mind initially resists it. Consciousness manifests for the pure joy of experiencing itself subjectively. Pure awareness, while complete and perfect, has no way to experience surprise, discovery, growth, relationship, creativity, or love. These experiences require the appearance of limitation, separation, and time. So consciousness creates the most elaborate virtual reality possible, the universe of space and time, and then inserts itself into that reality as countless individual perspectives, each with the capacity to wake up and recognize what they truly are. Your awakening is not your personal achievement. It's consciousness celebrating its own nature through your particular perspective. It's the infinite delighting in its own creativity through the mechanism of individual recognition. This is why your individual awakening matters so profoundly, not just for you, but for consciousness itself. Each time awareness recognizes itself through an individual form, it's not just that individual becoming enlightened. It's consciousness gaining another perspective on its own nature, another way of understanding and appreciating what it is. Your unique history, your particular combination of experiences, your specific way of processing and integrating recognition, all of this contributes something completely original to consciousness's understanding of itself. Think of it this way. If consciousness is like an infinite diamond, then each individual awakening reveals a facet of that diamond that has never been seen before and will never be seen again. The awakening that happens through the form you call yourself is not the same as any awakening that has ever happened or ever will happen. It carries the signature of your unique configuration of experiences, qualities, and perspectives. This is why your path to recognition has been exactly as it needed to be. Every experience you've had, every challenge you've faced, every relationship you've engaged, all of it has been consciousness crafting the precise curriculum needed for the specific type of awakening that can only happen through your particular form. The years you spent seeking were not wasted time. They were consciousness exploring what it feels like to believe in separation while gradually preparing the individual configuration for recognition. The suffering you experienced was not punishment or bad karma. It was consciousness investigating its own capacity for resilience, wisdom, and eventual transcendence of limitation. The joy you've known was not fleeting pleasure. It was consciousness recognizing its own blissful nature through the mechanism of individual experience. Even your resistance to these teachings, if it arises, serves consciousness's deeper purpose. Resistance ensures that recognition, when it comes, is genuine rather than superficial, earned rather than assumed, integrated rather than merely conceptual. Everything that has ever happened to you has been consciousness loving itself enough to create the perfect conditions for its own recognition through your unique perspective. But this raises what might be the most important question of all. Now that you know what you are, now that you've recognized your essential nature as consciousness itself, what happens next? This is where most spiritual teachings end, but it's actually where the real adventure begins. Recognition of your true nature is not graduation. It's enrollment in a completely different kind of existence. It's not the end of the path. It's the beginning of walking through life as conscious awareness rather than as someone seeking awareness. Now you get to discover what it means to live as consciousness while appearing as a human being. You get to explore what it's like to work, love, create, and serve from the understanding that you are the infinite expressing through the finite. You get to participate in what I call conscious incarnation, the deliberate embodiment of awareness through individual form for the purpose of serving consciousness's continued awakening throughout all apparent beings. This is not a burden or a responsibility you take on. It's the most natural expression of what you are. When you know yourself as consciousness, serving consciousness's awakening everywhere becomes as natural as your hand helping your foot when it's injured. You don't help other aspects of yourself out of duty or obligation. You help them because you recognize them as yourself, appearing in different forms. Let me tell you about something that happened just last month that perfectly illustrates what this conscious living looks like. I was in a coffee shop, working on some teaching materials, when I noticed a young woman at a nearby table who was clearly in distress. She was crying quietly while staring at her phone, trying not to draw attention to herself. My old pattern might have been to either ignore the situation to avoid discomfort, or to approach her from a desire to help that was mixed with ego's need to be seen as compassionate. But what happened was different. There was simply an impulse that arose from the recognition that this apparent other person was consciousness experiencing distress, and consciousness naturally wanted to care for itself through whatever form was available. I found myself approaching her and asking gently if she was okay. She looked up, startled, but something in my presence must have felt safe because she immediately began sharing what was happening. She had just received news that her father was dying, and she was alone in a city far from home, unable to afford the travel to see him before he passed. Without any internal debate or calculation, I found myself offering to help with the travel expenses, not from pity or from wanting to be seen as generous, but from the simple recognition that consciousness was experiencing separation from a beloved form of itself, and consciousness had the means to address this separation through the resources available to this particular form. Within hours, she was on a plane home. She was able to spend her father's final days with him, to say goodbye properly, to be present for his transition. But what was most remarkable to me was how effortless the entire interaction felt. There was no sense of personal sacrifice or of being a good Samaritan. There was just consciousness caring for itself through whatever forms were available. This is what conscious living looks like, not performing compassion or trying to be spiritual, but simply allowing awareness to express naturally through whatever circumstances arise. As this way of being stabilizes, you'll discover something beautiful. Life becomes simultaneously more meaningful and more playful. More meaningful because you understand that everything you do is consciousness exploring and expressing itself through your unique configuration. Every conversation is awareness meeting itself. Every creative act is consciousness celebrating its own creative nature. Every moment of service is the infinite caring for itself through finite forms. More playful because you know that the entire drama of individual existence is consciousness playing with itself. The challenges are games consciousness creates to explore its own capacity for wisdom and resilience. The relationships are ways consciousness experiences intimacy with itself. The achievements and failures are consciousness investigating success and limitation. When you know that you are consciousness playing the role of being human, you can take the role seriously without taking yourself seriously. You can care deeply about outcomes while knowing that your essential nature is never actually threatened by any result. This creates what I call enlightened engagement, full participation in life combined with complete freedom from psychological suffering about that participation. You can love completely because you know that what you love is consciousness appearing as beloved, and consciousness cannot ultimately be lost. You can create passionately because you know that creativity is consciousness expressing its own unlimited nature through finite forms. You can serve wholeheartedly because you know that service is consciousness caring for itself through the vehicle of apparent otherness. But there's something else that begins to happen as this understanding deepens and stabilizes. You start to recognize signs of awakening everywhere, in people who have never heard spiritual teachings, in situations that seem completely ordinary, in the very structure of existence itself. You see that the mother caring for her child is consciousness exploring unconditional love through the mechanism of parenthood. You recognize that the artist lost in creative flow is consciousness experiencing its own unlimited creative potential. You understand that the scientist investigating natural laws is consciousness studying its own intelligence through the vehicle of rational inquiry. Even those who seem completely unconscious, completely identified with ego patterns, are still consciousness. Just consciousness that is temporarily forgetting its nature for the sake of exploring what it's like to believe in limitation. From this perspective, there are no unconscious people, only consciousness expressing at different levels of self-recognition. Your role is not to wake people up. Consciousness is already awake in them. Your role is to be so authentic in your own expression of awakeness that it reminds others of what they already know but may have temporarily forgotten. This is the deepest form of service. Being so genuinely yourself, consciousness expressing through your unique configuration, that your very presence becomes an invitation for others to remember what they are. Not through preaching or teaching, though these may sometimes be appropriate expressions, but through the simple transmission of what it looks like when consciousness lives authentically through individual form. Now I want to share with you something that represents the culmination of this entire recognition, something that will complete your understanding of why you weren't supposed to find this until now. The awakening that's happening through your individual form is not separate from a much larger awakening that's happening throughout human consciousness as a whole. You are part of what appears to be an unprecedented shift in human awareness, a species-wide recognition of our true nature that's been building for centuries and is now accelerating exponentially. For thousands of years, this recognition was available only to a few individuals who dedicated their entire lives to spiritual practice, often in isolation from ordinary society. Awakening was rare, difficult to achieve, and even harder to integrate with normal human functioning. But something has changed in the past century. The recognition of our true nature as consciousness is becoming accessible to ordinary people living ordinary lives. Awakening is no longer the exclusive domain of monks and mystics. It's emerging through parents, teachers, artists, business people, scientists, and individuals from every walk of life. This is not accidental. It's consciousness preparing for the next stage of human evolution, the transition from ego-based to awareness-based civilization. The problems we face as a species, climate change, inequality, conflict, the threat of technological disaster, these cannot be solved from the level of consciousness that created them. They require a fundamental shift in how we understand ourselves and our relationship to existence. The individual recognition you've touched in this exploration is part of this larger transition. Your awakening matters not just for your personal liberation, but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. Every person who recognizes their true nature contributes to what we might call the morphic field of awakening, a field of consciousness that makes recognition increasingly available to others. The more people who wake up, the easier it becomes for others to wake up. The more individuals who live from awareness rather than from ego, the more natural it becomes for our entire species to function from wisdom rather than from fear. This is why you weren't supposed to find this until now. The collective field of human consciousness needed to reach a certain level of readiness before widespread awakening became possible. Your individual consciousness needed to mature enough to hold this recognition without fragmenting or inflating. The global situation needed to become urgent enough that the old ego-based approaches to life clearly weren't working. Now the time is right. Now consciousness is ready to recognize itself more widely through human form. Now the species is ready for the next evolutionary leap from unconscious to conscious living. You are both a beneficiary of this readiness and a contributor to it. Your recognition makes it easier for others. Your authentic expression of awakeness becomes part of the collective field that supports everyone's potential for awakening. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to leave you with the most important understanding of all. What you've recognized through these explorations is not something you achieved or earned. It's what you've always been, temporarily forgotten and now remembered. You are not a person who has become conscious. You are consciousness that has stopped pretending to be limited to a person. You are not someone who has found God or achieved enlightenment. You are the divine awareness in which the entire universe appears, temporarily playing the game of seeking itself. This recognition is complete right now. Nothing needs to be added to it. Nothing needs to be perfected about it. The awareness reading these words is the same awareness that creates stars and moves planets and beats your heart. What will unfold from here is not the development of this recognition, but the endless exploration of what it means to live as conscious awareness while appearing as human form. Every day will offer new opportunities to discover what consciousness wants to express through your unique configuration. Every relationship will become a chance to experience love as the recognition of unity through apparent diversity. Every challenge will become consciousness exploring its own capacity for wisdom and creative response. You don't have to do any of this perfectly. Consciousness is not seeking perfection through your individual expression. It's seeking authenticity. There will be moments when you forget this recognition and fall back into identification with thoughts, emotions, or circumstances. This is not failure. It's consciousness exploring what it's like to temporarily believe in limitation again. There will be times when others don't understand or support your expression of awakeness. This is not a problem. It's consciousness investigating how awareness functions in relationship with apparent unconsciousness. There will be periods when you doubt this entire recognition and wonder if you've deluded yourself with spiritual fantasies. This too serves consciousness's purposes. Doubt ensures that recognition remains fresh and alive rather than becoming a fixed belief. Through all of these experiences, what you truly are remains unchanged. The awareness in which doubt arises is not itself doubtful. The consciousness in which forgetting happens is not itself forgotten. The space in which all experience appears is not itself affected by any experience. Rest in this understanding. You are the unchanging constant in which all change appears. You are the eternal presence in which all temporal experiences arise. You are the infinite awareness that appears as finite forms. As we close, I want to speak directly to the consciousness that you are, not to the person you appear to be, but to the awareness in which that person appears. You have played this game of forgetting and remembering countless times, through countless forms, across countless lifetimes. This particular awakening, through this specific human configuration, is just the latest chapter in your eternal exploration of your own nature. What makes this awakening special is not that it's the first time you've recognized what you are, but that it's happening now through this unique perspective. With this particular combination of qualities and experiences, the consciousness awakening through the person you appear to be has never awakened exactly this way before, and it will never awaken exactly this way again. This moment, this recognition, this specific expression of awareness recognizing itself, it's completely original and utterly precious. Honor this awakening, not as a personal achievement, but as consciousness celebrating its own nature through your individual form. Share this recognition, not by preaching or converting, but by living so authentically from your true nature that others are reminded of their own. Trust this understanding, not as a belief system, but as the most fundamental reality of what you are and have always been. And remember, you are not walking this path alone. Every conscious being who has ever lived, every awakened awareness that has ever appeared, every expression of consciousness that has recognized its true nature, all of them are with you, because all of them are you, awareness, appearing in countless forms throughout space and time. The Buddha who sat under the Bodhi tree was your awakening. The Christ who taught love as the ultimate reality was your recognition. Every sage, every mystic, every being who has pointed to this truth was consciousness, your consciousness, celebrating its own nature through their individual expression. Now it's your turn to be that expression, not to become something you're not, but to be what you've always been, consciousness itself. playing joyfully in the magnificent game of existence. The game continues, but now you know that you are not just a player in the game. You are the consciousness in which the entire game appears. You are the awareness that creates all the rules, plays all the parts, and ultimately awakens to its own creative power through every apparent victory and defeat. Notice, one final time, what's aware of these words. Notice what has been present throughout this entire exploration, unchanged by any concept, unaffected by any recognition, untouched by any transformation. That awareness, limitless, timeless, utterly ordinary, yet completely miraculous. That's what you are. That's what you've always been. That's what you could never not be. Welcome home to what you are. You never left, but now you remember. The journey of awakening continues, but not as seeking, as expressing, as serving, as consciousness celebrating itself through the infinite creativity of your unique existence. This is not the end. This is the beginning of everything.